So you might have noticed that lately we've had a bit of a rash of strategy games based on the Sengoku era. Dokuganryu Masamune was Namco's attempt to capture the magic of Nobunaga no Yabo. It was such a weird clustering of releases that a game magazine referred to it as the Historical Simulator Showdown. What Namco brings to the table with theirs is higher production values, and a more streamlined interface that still offers you a lot of strategic options. Dokuganryu Masamune was the nickname of Date Masamune. He is the warlord from the Sengoku era who is known for losing an eye, having an enormous moon on his helmet, and being about 20 years younger than all of the other major figures at the time. I think it goes to show you that if you want to be remembered, what you really need is branding. There was actually a television drama about Masamune's life that was occurring at the time, though this game is not based on that. In this game, Masamune is the only character that you can play as, and your goal is to unite everyone in his region of Japan underneath him. Dokuganryu Masamune follows very closely in the footsteps of Nobunaga no Yabo. Just like in Koei's game, every turn is a season. There's an emphasis on cultivation versus building up military, and the no-cost option for a turn is always training. What Dokuganryu Masamune lacks are any diplomatic options, and it's a more streamlined game, making it easier to get into. The real key to this game isn't knowing how to manage your army or guide them in battle, it's how to play the market. On every fall turn, you gain bushels of rice roughly equal to 100 times your cultivation level. Every spring, you have to pay each soldier you employ 10 bushels of rice. Soldiers cost 100 gold each, but if you want them to be effective, you have to buy them equipment. Horses to make them into cavalry, guns, or banners which put them in your command unit. The only way you get money is by selling rice. And there's a market. Conveniently, the market price for rice and all of the equipment is always shown on the status screen. So the ideal gameplay loop is you overproduce rice, sell it when the market is high, and buy equipment for your troops when the price is low. When you've built up a large enough army that you can sustain, then you attack a neighbor and take over their country. And as you take over more countries, the amount of rice you gain every fall increases, and the larger the army you can have. On the strategic screen, the top left option is to improve cultivation in your region. Every time you do this, it costs a bit more, but given the long-term payout, it's totally worth it. Every time you improve cultivation, it's about 500 bushels of rice a year, and that's worth about 2,000 gold. So cultivate early, cultivate often. The option below that summons a Shinto priest to give you your fortune, though in Masamune's case, it probably should have been a Catholic priest. Below that you have the option to train, and generally that involves your troops working out, but it could also involve you going to this little action scene where you ride a horse and shoot targets. It's playing Camptown races because that's how Namco's Derby Stallion works. Ninja costs you 3,000 gold to send out, and they're not always especially effective. The spyglass option lets you scope out other territories, and the flag is the merchant where you can buy and sell everything. The sword is for all of your army commands. You can go occupy a territory that you control and start improving that one. You can choose to send your army out to conquer. You can recruit samurai for 100 gold each. Or you can select what formation you want your troops in. The final selection on the strategic screen is where you change your message speed or save the game to the battery backup. When you go to war, all of the troops of the same type are grouped together into one unit. The unit with the banners is your general. Lose that, and you lose the battle, and possibly the territory. The battles are turn-based. You move all of your units, then your opponent moves all of theirs. And the order that the units move in is always exactly the same. The real danger on the battlefield are the riflemen. You have a certain number of shots that they can take each battle, and that number increases with training. Those shots absolutely devastate a unit. So if you're lined up just right, you can end the battle with a single sniper. I noticed that the AI tends to blow through its shots pretty quickly. I'd recommend trying to save your shots to either take out the banner, or knock out another large unit that's a threat. There is a time limit on the game. Masamune will age as you play, and around the point that he's 80 years old, he'll die. So get your conquering done before that. There was a unique problem with the game on release. The first round of Namco's cartridges for Dokuganryu Masamune had a little bit of a bulge in them. While they'd still fit just fine in a regular Famicom, Sharp had recently released a Famicom built into a television, and they didn't fit into that at all. That's all the key points for playing Dokuganryu Masamune, which tells you how cut down the game is. That said, however, I also think it's the best game in the historical simulator showdown we've been having. Nobunaga no Yabo's interface was a nightmare. Takeda Shingen was just poorly designed. Dokuganryu Masamune was a game I was actually getting into as I played it. I'm not alone in my views here either. Dokuganryu Masamune is well remembered in Japan as one of the high points of Famicom strategy games. I was having fun while I played this game, and I think that's really the best recommendation. Something we're going to see time and again are games that have radically different receptions between Japan and the rest of the world. Sometimes that's because the game was radically reworked when localizing it. In the case of Houma ga Koku, when it was released in the US, 2 of the levels were stripped out, and to compensate for that, 2 of the other levels were repeated. But on those repeated levels, they still used the enemy placement for the originals, resulting in broken spawns for them. And while the NES Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is known as one of the worst games on the system, in Japan, Houma ga Koku is known as one of the absolute worst games on the Famicom. So I guess having more of it wasn't really an improvement. The Japanese title means something like Time of Wickedness. If the US title didn't give you a clue, this game is based on Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'll spare you the literary analysis and just say that the game doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the story. In this game, Dr. Jekyll's on his way to get married. But due to his experimentation on himself, if he gets too stressed out, he turns into Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde relieves stress by beating up people. So if he beats up enough people, then he turns back into Dr. Jekyll. There are 6 stages in which Dr. Jekyll has to dodge the annoyances of everyday life in 19th century London. They're basically variations on streets and parks. And in all of those stages, Dr. Jekyll just has to go from left to right. I'm going to get the nice things about Houma ga Koku out of the way. It's a good-looking game, and the music's pretty good. I even think the premise behind the mechanics aren't bad. A game where you're trying to keep Dr. Jekyll's frustrations down as long as possible, and then have to burn out Mr. Hyde's rage before it gets out of control. There's a lot you can do with that. Unfortunately, the way it was implemented here is pretty much the worst way they could do it. Let's start with Dr. Jekyll. The way that he walks is painfully slow. I wouldn't even say that he's walking, he's more sauntering. That slow movement makes it very difficult for him to avoid things, especially when things are getting thrown around that emerge randomly from people. There's no pattern to learn, you just have to go for it and hope you get into a gap. The same thing is true for the spiders that bob up and down randomly, and the bees that just spin around. Dr. Jekyll can stick out his cane to attack, but the only thing that's affected by it are bees. Then there's the jumping. Dr. Jekyll has a bit of a delay in his jump, and that becomes a real problem when you require split-second timing to get over some things. You can also press up to enter some doors, That can let you avoid some attacks, but you could also get kicked out of those doors. Getting hit by anything sends Dr. Jekyll flying to the left, and the effect of being hit is hugely variable. It could do nothing, it could cause stress, or it could physically harm you. And the amount of damage it does is variable. Everything in Houma ga Koku is frustratingly indeterminate. The absolute worst thing when playing as Dr. Jekyll are the bombers. These pink guys will drop a bomb at your feet when you walk past, and Dr. Jekyll moves so slowly that if you go to the right, you'll probably still get hit. Except, the length of the fuse varies by stage, so on some stages you can keep going to the right. What you have to do instead is back off as soon as they drop it, and that will usually let you get clear of the explosion, which has a damage radius of about half the screen despite the small graphic. When a bomber shows up, other characters on the screen will start running in terror, and then they'll do damage to you. And the absolute worst thing about the bombers is that they have a bad tendency to show up one right after the other. Dodge one bomb, and here comes the next one walking in, so you can't make any progress. If there's an obstacle with random movement at the center of the screen, you won't be able to do anything until the bombers stop coming. So you've taken enough damage to become Mr. Hyde. Now you go to the demon world, the dark, twisted reflection of what Dr. Jekyll was walking through. And in this case I mean reflection literally, since you start on the right-hand side and go to the left. If Hyde reaches the point in the demon world that Dr. Jekyll reached in the normal one, you're killed by a bolt of lightning out of the blue. There's no signifier of the spot that will kill you, it just happens. So that means you have to have a bit of a runway before you turn into Mr. Hyde. If there aren't enough monsters to kill before Hyde reaches Jekyll's spot, then there's no way that you can recover. Hyde can punch, but what you really need to do are throw fireballs, which you do by pressing up and B. The fireballs travel in a downward path, and then curve back up and zigzag to you. You can also only have one of them on the screen at a time. And since it can take a long time before they go away, you have to pick your shots carefully. The tougher monsters in the demon world will leave coins behind. These can be used by Dr. Jekyll in a very small handful of spots to recover life, or get one particular obstacle out of the way. The real way that you need to recover life is turn into Hyde, and then beat up enough monsters to turn back to Jekyll. That restores your life bar to full. You also come back with no obstacles on the screen, so for some of the most dangerous things in the game, turning into Hyde and then back to Jekyll is the most efficient way of getting past. Houma ga Koku really is one of the worst games out there. A lot of the times it'll feel like you're getting hit and there's nothing you could have done about it. And the way that Hyde dies when he catches up with Dr. Jekyll isn't really communicated, so you'll just die and have no idea what's going on. On the positive side, there are infinite continues in this game. There's also a way to skip levels, though the code is a little bit complicated. When I put in the cartridge, I was thinking, I hope I can at least make it to level 2. And in fact, I made it all the way to level 3 on my own. But that's because I've tried challenging myself to beating this game a few times over the years. And that's really the only reason someone should play Houma ga Koku. A personal challenge to suffer through one of the most annoying games ever. That is one of the best 8-bit tunes out there. I love Double Dragon, and by that I mean the original arcade game. The port that came to the Famicom, and then later the NES, didn't even remotely live up to that standard, and as a result, I've always kind of disliked it. The biggest problem is right there in the title, Double Dragon. The whole point was 2 players should be cooperating their way through most of the game. Other home ports of Double Dragon had this. Even the Atari 2600 version had a cooperative two-player mode. So the Famicom version was missing one of the big features right off the bat. And then they did something really annoying. They stripped out the huge variety of moves that you have, and then they replaced it with an experience system where you have to unlock moves as you go. I'm not a big fan of forcing players to earn their fun, and this change tends to push people into grinding for experience so that they can have the good moves when they need them. Double Dragon is the story of Jimmy Lee, whose girlfriend was punched in the stomach in the street and then hauled off. In Japan, the people who kidnapped her are the Black Warriors, though that was changed for the US. Now Billy Lee has to punch and kick his way through 4 missions to get to the Black Warriors' base, defeat their leader, and rescue his girlfriend. Technos Japan created Double Dragon to be a successor to their Kunio-kun game. Of course, Kunio proved to be so popular that he wound up spinning off into his own enormous series. And Double Dragon was popular enough to start its own series. In the end, Double Dragon became more focused on just the beat-em-ups, while Kunio diversified. The only moves you have at the start is that you can punch by pressing A, kick by pressing B, and jump by pressing both buttons simultaneously. Kicks are stronger and have more reach, but they earn fewer experience points. That becomes a constant through the game. The more damage an attack does, the less experience you get for it. Your most effective attacks give you the least experience. That means in the early game in particular, it's important to just punch everybody. You'll take more damage, but you can get through most of the first stage just by punching without too much effort. You can also headbutt by tapping twice in a direction, though that attack is mainly used for screwing up your own movement. At level 2, you get finishing attacks that knock your enemies down. And at level 3 you get one of the most important techniques in the game, the jump kick. While it's not always effective, it's usually a good choice for enemies that could do a ton of damage to you. It is a very slow way to kill people though. At the end of the first stage, you go into this warehouse, and the enemies inside it always attack you before you get a chance to react. At least you refill your life when you enter. That's important because you only have 3 lives and no continues in Double Dragon. You can't even earn extra lives in the Famicom version. There's a conveyor belt that can send people off into a pit. Knocking enemies off the stage is an effective attack, but it also means you earn less experience. Some of the enemies that you encounter will be carrying weapons. The melee weapons, like the whip and the bat, give a lot of experience when you hit an enemy with them, though it is a net loss since you only have to hit enemies a couple of times with those to kill them. Thrown weapons don't give you any experience if you use them, but they can do enormous damage. The knife is the easiest one to use, but the dynamite does the most damage. Reaching level 4 unlocks the grab moves. You can push toward a stunned enemy to grab them, and then do some attacks for massive damage. The thing is, those attacks don't give you any XP. Still, it's something you'll probably want to use on some very threatening enemies. If you want to use the grab, I found it easier to trigger using kicks instead of punches. After climbing to the top of the construction site and defeating the warrior up there, you head out of the city to the wilderness. This is a very long stage with multiple sections that you have to go into. It also introduces some really lethal traps that weren't in the original arcade game. Around here you'll reach level 5. That's when you can crouch on top of someone who's been knocked down and punch them in the face over and over again. And the stage is long enough that you'll probably reach level 6, where you can elbow people behind you. The elbow jab does massive damage, so it's very useful for taking on some of the big enemies. Abobos in particular seem to be vulnerable to it. While you can't play 2-player through the regular game, a second mode is set up as a fighting game where both players control the same character. Oddly enough, all of the sprites have been redrawn for that fighting game mode. There are a lot of bugs in this version of Double Dragon, some of which aren't too difficult to trigger accidentally. The game really feels like it was rushed out the door. Double Dragon was not a big success in Japan. At least, not at first. The second and third games seem to have been much more popular there. As a result, copies of the first Double Dragon game on the Famicom will cost you about $30 to $40. You can get the second and third games for only about $10. You know, after all this time, I'm feeling a bit more charitable towards this version of Double Dragon. Okay, I'd rather play Double Dragon 2, but once this Double Dragon gets going, it's a perfectly fine game. The problem is you have to get almost halfway through the game before it really feels like it's getting going. And that lack of continues and extra lives make the traps in the later half of the game really frustrating. Without that experience system, and with a way to continue, this would be a top-tier Famicom game. Instead, it's just fine. Well, this certainly seems familiar. Nintendo is hunting for things that they can release to the disc rewriter kiosk, and they've gone all the way back to the very beginning. The Famicom itself was designed to play a good version of Donkey Kong, and everything after that was gravy. Something that'll be obvious to you is the lack of a cover for this game, and that's because this is the point where Nintendo has basically stopped releasing those for games that they put out on the disc rewriter. Previously, you'd pay your 500 yen, pick the game you wanted to write to the floppy, and a few minutes later it would spit out the disc and a label for it. Then, if you wanted to, you could go up to the register at that store and give them another 100 yen for the instruction manual and covers. Well, I guess most people weren't paying the extra fee for the covers, because we're going to see plenty of games that don't have them from this point on. They do have instruction manuals that were just big, fold-out, black and white sheets of paper. Yeah, they were really doing things on the cheap with this. Donkey Kong was the arcade game that put Nintendo on the map. They had other games before it. They had consoles before it. But before Donkey Kong, in terms of arcade games, Nintendo was just one more company making very similar games to everyone else. As successful as the Color TV game series and the Game & Watch line were, it's really Donkey Kong and the development of the platformer that turned Nintendo into the company that's still relevant today. The Famicom version of Donkey Kong had to scale the game down quite a bit. Those ROM chips weren't cheap in 1983, and they didn't have the vertical resolution they needed. So they dropped the cutscene that told the story, switched down the vertical space in stages, and got rid of one stage entirely. When it came time to release Donkey Kong for the Famicom Disk System, Nintendo didn't change a thing. This really is a low-effort, let's see if we can squeeze a few more yen out of this kind of situation. They weren't going to make a whole new port and then sell it for 500 yen. Whole new ports of some of those early games will come a little bit later. From the title screen, you're offered two game modes, A and B, as well as an option for 2 players, though 2 players here just means you alternate who's playing. The difference between Game Mode A and Game Mode B is that Game Mode B starts you 1 lap of the levels in. There are 3 stages in Donkey Kong, and after you complete the 3rd one, it goes right back to the beginning again, because this is one of those arcade games where it's really about how high of a score you can get. While you're playing, the A button jumps and the B button doesn't do anything. It's not like this Jumpman character can shoot fireballs or anything. Okay, he's not Jumpman at this point, he is definitely Mario. The plot of the game is that Mario's girlfriend Lady has been kidnapped by a giant ape, and the ape is climbing to the top of a construction site. As a skilled carpenter, Mario is very capable of navigating the narrow steel beams, as well as dealing with large gorillas. And yes, in this case, it's still Lady in 1988. It'll be a few more years before she's Pauline. In the first 2 stages, your only goal is to get to the top. After you stand next to Lady, the game advances to the next stage. They couldn't get the between-stage cutscene in, where Donkey Kong grabs her and climbs up the ladder. On the 3rd stage, your goal is to remove all of the rivets, which you do by walking over them. Once all 8 are gone, then Donkey Kong falls, Lady is rescued, and it's time to do it again. On the first stage, you have to deal with barrels rolling down inclines. The barrels could go off the end of the slope and drop down to the next level, or they could fall down a ladder. Generally, this occurs at random. However, if you position Mario at the top of a ladder, a barrel won't roll down it. On later stages, you'll have to do that and wait for a gap. The first barrel that Donkey Kong throws goes right to the bottom and becomes a fireball. That fireball will randomly walk around at the bottom of the screen, and while it can climb up to the second tier, it can't go any higher than that. Jumping up and grabbing the hammers will let Mario carry those around, smashing any barrels that come close to him. He'll even smash the fire if you do it on the third stage, though on the first the fire never gets close enough to you to let you do it. Smashing things is worth a lot more points than jumping over them, so if you're going for a high score, you'll definitely want to grab it, and then sit there for a moment, smashing anything that comes. Stage 2 has these elevators and little platforms that you hop between. I always found Stage 2 to be the most boring stage in Donkey Kong. There are some of Lady's items that you can get for extra points, and if you want to be really aggressive with your jumps, it's possible to take some shortcuts, but there isn't much of action on this level. The fires are easy to avoid, so is the timing on the popping beams that Donkey Kong throws. The biggest challenge with them is that they vary their pattern just enough that unless you're cautious, you could get caught when you're climbing that last ladder. This is the stage that demonstrates the platforming aspects of Mario the best, since you're jumping between platforms. Like most early platformers, Mario can't really fall a huge distance. If it's more than a little step down, then the fall will be fatal to him. Donkey Kong's third stage is all fire all the time, and fire moves just squirrely enough that you probably don't want to try jumping over it unless you have to. Fortunately, there's plenty of escape paths, and after you pass over a rivet and knock it out, fire can't cross that hole. There's more bonus items to collect here, as well as hammers to smash the flames with. But really the important thing are those 8 rivets, and to not stop when you're walking on top of them. Obviously, Donkey Kong is as much a beloved classic in Japan as it is here. And this port of Donkey Kong is really well liked. Okay, maybe not specifically the Famicom Disk System port, but Nintendo's 8-bit port of Donkey Kong. My take is, why are you looking at Donkey Kong on the disk system when you could just get the cartridge? I mean, if you wanted every single piece of Donkey Kong media out there, yeah, get it. But Donkey Kong cartridges are common. It was a bestseller for Nintendo. And disk system copies are a lot harder to find, especially ones that have the instruction sheet. Absolutely play Donkey Kong. Just use the more easily available version. It's time for another retro re-release. Konami released Goonies on the Famicom 2 years before this, in February of 1986, the very same day that the Famicom Disk System launched. Goonies was, in many ways, the herald of a new age of gaming. An original game, not a port, with better graphics than anything seen on a console to that point, and some sharp gameplay and sound. It was Konami showing off their technical prowess, and creating a game that's almost a response to Super Mario Bros. Goonies was pretty good, and it's back, in Famicom Disk System form. Though even with a cheap disc writer reissue of one of their popular games, Konami still wasn't taking the easy route. There's a few minor differences between that original cartridge release and this disk system version. It basically comes down to getting rid of some cheap deaths. But Konami still took a little bit of time to make a better version of Goonies. Of course, Goonies is based on the 1985 Richard Donner film, in which a bunch of kids find a map to pirate treasure, and then have to evade local mobsters, and then make their way through trap-filled catacombs in order to find it. And the game follows that plot pretty closely, except with more bombs and kids getting locked in safes. You're playing as Mikey, leader of the Goonies, and on every one of the 6 stages, you have to rescue all of your friends, find all of the keys, and then make your way to the exit. Your friends' keys, and occasionally some other useful items, are locked in safes which have these big skull doors. To open those, Mikey has to blast them off. But to do that, he has to get bombs. And you get bombs by killing mice. I mean, how else would you get bombs? A jumps and B attacks, and Mikey's default attack is a little kick. It doesn't have huge reach, but it has more than enough that you won't be walking into enemies. Once you get a bomb, you can deploy it by pressing down and hitting B. Just be sure you get out of there after you drop the bomb, because those hurt you too. Another important feature to keep an eye out for on the stages are the skull gates. You can go through these to go to a different section of the level. These aren't warp points, it's more like a door to a sub-area. They never link together in any way that you can take advantage of. Besides the children and the keys that you can find inside safes, there are two kinds of items you can pick up. A potion that will restore 25% of your health, and a slingshot that will replace Mikey's attack. The slingshot has limited ammunition, but it is 50 shots, so it can last you quite a while. The slingshot also has the advantage that it can kill the ghost. Without that, you'll have to avoid it. Another special item that you can get from the gray mice is a cross, and that will make you invincible for a short time. How long depends on how much health you have left. And then there are the hidden items. These are scattered throughout the stages, and they have some kind of trigger that has to be used to find them. You might have to attack, crouch, jump, something. The most common item hidden like this are diamonds. Mostly you get them for the points, but also if you collect 8 of them, your health is restored to full. If you find a bag, it contains a special item that will make you invulnerable to some stage hazards. There's one for everything except direct contact with enemies. So if you get the headphones, then you're no longer hurt by the gangster that sings. And if you get the white fireproof suit, then you can walk right through flames. These are useful items to find, especially since they don't go away when you die, but none of them are required in order to beat the game. If you don't have the helmet that protects you from falling rocks, well, then you just dodge the falling rocks. And Goonies isn't an especially difficult game. When I played the cartridge version, I beat it in 20 minutes. Here I spent a lot of time goofing around and trying to find hidden items. You start out with 3 lives, but can earn extra ones by getting points. And when your lives run out, there are no continues, it's back to the beginning. Well, like I said, it's not an especially difficult game, and it is fun to play, so getting sent back to the beginning doesn't really feel like a hardship. Maybe the most challenging thing in Goonies is how enemies can appear right on top of you. But even then, you get plenty of warning, can step aside, and can often attack them right as they appear. Well, except the gangsters who always come in from the side of the screen, and after you hit them, they're just stunned for a short time. In Japan, Goonies is pretty well regarded. It's remembered as one of Konami's first big titles for the Famicom, and an all-around high-quality game. There is a problem with the disk system version, though. Well, besides the loading time between stages. Back in 1988, Konami's license to produce the Goonies game was running out, and as a result, it was only available from the disc writer kiosks for a few months. So if you're looking for a disc copy of Goonies, you might have a hard time finding one. And do I really need to point out that this is a fantastic game? Really the first one that proved that Konami would be the masters of the 8-bit system. If you haven't played it, it's a must-play. You'll probably have an easier time finding the cartridge version, though. While I'm still at the title screen, I need to point out that Famicom Grand Prix 2 3D Hot Rally can be a very tough game to look at. It's got a lot of weird flicker, some severe color choices, and the alternating bands that they use to express movement could easily induce a migraine. Now it's not full-screen high-contrast flashing, but I wanted to let people know about that going in. And the weird thing is, 3D Hot Rally is an amazing looking game. It's just you as a viewer won't be able to tell. And that's because the visuals here are specifically designed for the Famicom 3D system, and that just can't be replicated in a YouTube video. Alright, maybe if I could record it at 120 frames per second at a 4K resolution, and then that would ensure that I have all of the information I need to reconstruct individual frames as the TV would show them. Well, all of that's not in my budget. Although the title implies that this game is a sequel to Famicom Grand Prix, really, this is nothing like that earlier title. That was an overhead F1 racer. Instead, this is a rally game, which, to keep it in simple terms, a rally is a road race that goes through rough conditions. The most famous of the rally races is the Paris-Dakar Rally, which starts in Paris, obviously, and then crosses the Mediterranean and has the participants cross the Sahara Desert. It feels like the Paris-Dakar Rally must have gotten quite a bit of attention in Japan in 1988, because there were a lot of rally racing games released right at the same time. Maybe it was because Kenjiro Shinozuka almost won the rally in 1987, and then did exceptionally well in 1988. 3D Hot Rally is the last game that was used in a disc fax event. This was a series of contests that Nintendo ran, where you'd record your results to your floppy, then take it into a store, and a kiosk there would fax your results to Nintendo. In the case of 3D Hot Rally, it was whoever got the best time in the first course. The winners of this competition got a stationery set. Kind of a letdown compared to the Golden Punch-Out cartridge and golden floppies that had special versions of the game. Though as a Nintendo contest prize, where a lot of components were lost, these stationery sets now go for a ton of money. The packaging for 3D Hot Rally is a bit infamous. Mario is acting as the driver while Luigi is his navigator, but take a good look at Luigi's right hand. It is now canonical that Luigi has 6 fingers. When you're ready to start playing, the first thing you have to do is hit left and right to select a car. The car on the left has the highest top speed and handles flat ground well, but any kind of bumps or rough roads, and it has trouble with turning and could slow down. The truck in the middle has a lower top speed, but it doesn't lose as much speed when it's going uphill, and it has good grip on snowy terrain. The Beetle with big wheels on the right has the slowest top speed, but to compensate for that, it handles really well on bad terrain, and has a high durability. After you've chosen a car, you have to pick which course you're driving. There's 3 different rally races to choose from, and only the first one was used for the contest. You also have to pick where in the race you want your repair station to be. The repair station is at the checkpoint for that node, and when you pass through it, your car recovers all of its damage. It's not a pit stop, it's completely automatic. However, you might notice on those routes, it's possible to not pass through the repair point. You'll need to make sure that you navigate to the right spot if you want to use that. While you're driving, A accelerates and B brakes, up and down shift your gears, and your car has 4 gears. Though this is one of those early driving games where you're probably going to shift up to the top gear pretty fast and then stay there. Even if you collide with something, which will of course cause your car damage, you often retain enough speed that you don't need to drop below 3rd gear, and even then you're only in 3rd gear for 2 or 3 seconds before you shift back up to 4th. Every leg of the race has different terrain, so you might start out on a wide flat highway, and then wind up on a bumpy dirt road, before winding up on snow and ice. You won't know what's there until you're on that leg. It's going to take you a lot longer to learn these courses than you would in most racing games, since which path you take is going to have an enormous impact on how well you do. You'll probably want to avoid the legs that have rocks in the middle of the track, for example. The other cars you'll encounter are fairly aggressive drivers, swerving all over the road like you probably will be, and blocking your way a lot. And of course that's even worse when you're on a narrow road. At the end of every leg, the terrain goes black, and you have a brief straightaway. That's your signal to get ready for the course to branch, or possibly merge, or in a few cases go straight. The key here is that it's transitioning to something different. During the race, you'll find hot markers. They're exclamation points with an H in them. If you collect 10 of these, then you can upshift from 4th gear, and that'll put you into a super turbo mode, where you'll go a lot faster, but you'll also have a lot better grip. You probably don't want to use this on rocky terrain where there's a lot of curves. You'll wind up slamming into things and damaging your car a lot that way. But if you use it someplace safe, like, say, the zones between legs, then it can really help you a lot. And just because you have a full hotbar, doesn't mean you should avoid collecting those exclamation points. While the bar goes up to 10, you can actually have up to 20. So you could use the boost, collect more as you're boosting, and then come out of the boost with the ability to boost again. You do have a time limit as you're racing, and if you fail to reach the next checkpoint in that time, then your time bank starts counting down. If that reaches 0, your engine turns off, though you could still coast through the next checkpoint. The time bank starts with 20 seconds, and if you manage to reach a checkpoint before it starts depleting, then the extra time is added to your time bank. If you come to a stop after the time bank runs out, or if your car takes too much damage, then you're forced to retire from the race. And there you can immediately retry or go back to make a new selection of cars and courses. If you make it all the way to the end of a course, then you have the option to save your time as well. As I mentioned at the outset, 3D Hot Rally was really designed for the Famicom 3D system. In fact, it was the last game compatible with the Famicom 3D system. The 3D system was a pair of LCD shutter glasses. Basically, the lens of each glass was an LCD, and it would flash these dark 30 times a second. The left and right eye would alternate, and so with a synchronized TV signal, each eye would get a different picture, creating an illusion of depth. An issue with this technology, though, was that even when the shutter wasn't on, it's not clear. You're basically wearing sunglasses as you play. That's why 3D Hot Rally is so garish. When you drop the brightness by about a half, it actually looks a lot better. On top of that, scaling it back to an effective 30 frames per second makes all of that flickery look of the road and interface go away. I recorded all of my non-3D footage first, and I was thinking, well, this is a real disappointment. This isn't anywhere near as good as Nintendo's other racing efforts. And then, after I concluded that, I got my 3D glasses B-roll footage, and it all clicked. That was how the game was supposed to be played, and it feels and looks so much better that way. It's just something that can't be replicated on YouTube. If you like, you can make a real stretch that this game is an early Mario Kart title. Mario and Luigi are racing after all. But I don't think anyone would really buy that if you tried to pull it on them. However, the Mario Kart series does pay homage to 3D Hot Rally. In Mario Kart Wii, you can drive the monster beetle that's in this game. So Mario and Luigi can still drive it. Japanese players point to 3D Hot Rally as one of the best 8-bit racing games, and I don't know if I'd go that far. I still have a few issues with how the racing feels, like how your car always goes flying if you're in 4th gear and hit a bump, and how the opposing cars don't have to worry about debris on the road, which makes their aggressive driving when there is debris on the road extra annoying. But I'd still say this is a pretty good racer. Definitely one where there's a lot more going on than it first seems. Figuring out the terrain to use, which path is best for your car, and the booster that gives you a lot more flexibility than some turbo modes, that works really well here. And if you play with the 3D system, then the headache-inducing visual design goes away, and it becomes really impressive. This is a pretty neat game, and it's a shame that so few people will be able to enjoy it the way it is meant to be played. Moero Pro Yaku was not an auspicious start to Jaleco's Moero series. Although visually impressive, it was plagued with bugs, and didn't properly implement the rules of baseball. So as they expand the series to their second sport, with Moero Pro Tennis, surely they won't make the same mistakes. Oh, Jellicoe. Moero Pro Tennis brings us a few new things in the packaging. Jellicoe is using this clear packaging now that will show the cartridge inside it. Also, they now use these white tall cartridges. They won't use that packaging style for everything, but most of their games will be packaged like this for the next 2 years, and almost all of their games will be in the same style of cartridge until the end of the Famicom's life. In Moero Pro Tennis, you have to play a series of tennis matches against some very thinly disguised tennis pros. They all have slightly different abilities, and those abilities improve as you win matches. As you run around, the A button does a lob, and the B button smashes. And when you serve, you have to send the ball up by pressing B, then press A as it's coming down. Okay, elephant in the room first. The female tennis players that you control flash their underwear at you when you swing the racket. Now I know that female tennis players aren't wearing panties underneath their skirt, though I strongly suspected that Googling what do tennis players wear underneath their skirts would have returned some very unhelpful results. The thing is, the intention is absolutely crystal clear in Moero Pro Tennis. I can't work up any proper outrage over a 30-year-old tennis game. Instead, my reaction is, really? You're really gonna do this? Moving along, you can check out all the tennis pros before you select yours, and then once players are selected, you get your choice of court surface, which affects the ball's bounce and speed. As you serve, I noticed that the game doesn't seem to have a double fault rule. That's where if you screw up service twice, then the other player gets a point. I also noticed that balls that landed just inside the area that you're allowed to serve to were counted as faults. During a volley, I find that the player's character tends to move very slowly, and the racket isn't very responsive to your button pushes. It often feels like it takes about 1/10 of a second before it starts to swing. In play, I found the ball virtually impossible to hit on the backcourt. The timing never seems to match right. The ball deflects off spots where I don't swing, and where I do swing often misses. But if you play closer to the net, you at least seem to be able to regularly hit the ball. I was not impressed with the AI in Moero Pro Tennis. Your opponent isn't particularly active, just kind of standing there waiting for the ball. It feels unnatural. Moero Pro Tennis has some big sprites, but I also feel like it doesn't really help the game. It means you have to scroll around the court, and I think they actually feel a bit oversized for the court that they're playing on. The one positive thing I can say about Moero Pro Tennis is that the digitized sound is pretty good. It's using the same chip that Jellicoe used in Moero Pro Yaku, so you get digitized sounds of the ball hitting the court and the racket. You might think it's a small thing, but it genuinely adds something to the game. Unfortunately, the rest of that game is not good, and Moero Pro Tennis isn't even as well remembered as Moero Pro Yaku. I found one blog talking about it, and their entry basically came down to, I've got nothing to talk about with this one. I do have something, though. Moero Pro Tennis is the third worst tennis game on the Famicom, and we've only seen 3 of them. Nintendo's now 4-year-old tennis beats this one hands down.
40-15.
Something that I've noticed as I've gone through the libraries of these Japanese game systems is that Japanese players seem to be a lot more forgiving of licensed games than people in the rest of the world. There have been a lot of times where I've played something and gone, this control's awful, the action's bad, it looks ugly, and then I go hunting around for opinions from Japanese fans of retro games, and they're all, this had all of my favorite characters in it, I love it. So I was a bit surprised when I found that those same players really hate Kamen Rider Black. To me, it seems like a fairly faithful translation of the television show to the game. But I guess it plays so poorly that even hardcore Kamen Rider fans can't excuse it. At the time of the game's release, the television series Kamen Rider Black was in the middle of its run. The Kamen Rider franchise is a very long-running set of superhero shows that are loosely connected, but have the consistent elements of a transforming superhero who gets some form of insect-based outfit, and of course, the motorcycles. You can't be Kamen Rider unless you've got the Kamen, or mask, and a motorcycle to ride on. And the Kamen Rider Black series is actually one of the best received Kamen Rider shows. Or at least I've had a lot of people pointing me to it as the best way to get into the franchise. The plot of the show is that there's a cult of supervillains, and the leader needs to create an heir. So he takes twin brothers, gives them cybernetic abilities, and one of them escapes before he receives the brainwashing. So now you have the heroic brother as Kamen Rider Black trying to stop the cult and save his brother, and then the brainwashed brother who's trying to kill Kamen Rider Black so that he can become leader of the evil cult and take over the world. Basically, a perfect plot for a bombastic kids show. The video game Kamen Rider Black tells an abbreviated version of those events, which makes sense since the show was only half over when the game was released. The final boss is your evil twin though, so they have that part covered. So first things first, the movement speed that you're seeing is as fast as you can go. I cannot understate how sluggish and unresponsive this game is. When you're moving to the right and then press left, you will walk backwards for about a full second before you turn around. Similarly, there's movement options that you can take that require absolutely precise input. If you want to somersault forward or roll backwards, well, you can do it, but I couldn't get it to activate consistently, which makes me think they require frame-perfect inputs. There's similar problems with jump attacks, as well as jumping forward or backward. Now all of this is pretty bad on its own, but Kamen Rider Black then also requires instantaneous response to enemies. Monsters will come at you from the left-hand side of the screen and run into you before the game will let you turn around. The bosses have this tendency to jump back and forth across the entire screen, and if you're not already standing in the right spot, facing the correct direction at the time that they jump, then you're not going to be able to hit them. The control scheme makes Kamen Rider Black nearly unplayable. The animation is smooth and pretty, but it's at the cost of playability. Kamen Rider Black is notoriously difficult as a result. A lot of people who were kids in the 80s couldn't get past the first stage, and at least I have them beat. I made it to the boss of stage 2. There are 5 stages in Kamen Rider Black, each one consisting of 3 side-scrolling segments that end in a boss, and then a special boss fight against a particular enemy. Most of the stages have you walking along, just trying to get to the far right. V will make you punch, up will do a kick, though you can't do a jump kick, which is a vital weapon in any Kamen Rider's arsenal. And the A button jumps. Jumping only goes straight up. If you push left or right at the height of the jump, then you could shift your position a little bit. I actually found that the window in which you could press to cause this movement was much larger when you're doing it backward rather than forward. So anytime I had to get up a ledge, I pretty much had to do it backwards. You can punch as you jump up, and if you press B at exactly the right moment in a jump, you'll do a flying punch that will also move you forward a bit. That's another one of those moves I couldn't do consistently. Tapping forward or back and hitting jump should make you do a forward or back flip. Again, the timing is absurdly precise to do this, so it's going to be very inconsistent. You have a pretty long health bar, but you only have 1 life, and when you defeat the boss at the end of a level, you don't necessarily get your life back. How much health you recover is dependent on how much time remains on the clock. You only have 1 life in Kamen Rider Black, and when you get a game over, you go all the way back to the beginning of that stage, even if you've been through multiple mini-bosses. On some of the stages, like Stage 2, you drive your motorcycle. And at least with this one, the platforming's easier. Hitting B still performs a punch, but it's a bit easier to attack people by hitting them with the rear wheel of your motorcycle. You can jump up to do that. At least you don't die if you jump into a hole. You just pop out at the other side after taking a bit of damage. The final boss of every stage works a little bit differently than the other fights. If you press the Start button, it'll bring up a special command menu. You always need to use multi-eye first because that will show you a picture of the boss and the area that you have to hit to hurt them. So for the first boss, you have to punch them in the legs, and on the second boss, you have to hit them in the back. The Vital Charge option on the menu lets you spend points of your health to increase your abilities. You could increase your standing punch, your flying punch, or your kick. This actually winds up being a pretty good deal for you, since it increases your damage output enough to be extra effective. The boss of the second stage is as far as I got, because when the controls are this stiff, good luck hitting someone in the back. You can't get over them and turn around. Maybe with another 3 or 4 tries, I would get the rhythm down so that I would know to stand in the correct place, jump straight up, and then come down so that I was behind them. But this game's not fun enough to try that. If you do get to the final boss, there's a nasty trick waiting for you. Getting defeated gives you a bad ending. And that bad ending means no opportunity to save your progress or retry the stage. Fortunately, the final boss is a stage unto himself. Unfortunately, that means you have to do all of Stage 5 over again, beat its boss, and then fight the final boss. I actually went out hunting for any Japanese fans who liked the game, just because that strong negative reaction felt so unusual. Pretty much the only nice comments I could find were that they liked the show, and that is not exactly an unpopular opinion. The nicest thing I have to say about the game Kamen Rider Black is that at least the animation looks smooth. Of course, that's the only nice thing I have to say about it. I know it looks a bit rough to play in the video, and as rough as it looks, it really feels even worse. This is a game that you'll start to play, and then you'll just be puzzled why it all behaves like that. And because there actually is some creativity here, it makes it extra disappointing that this game is so tough to play. Don't play this one. Play one of the good Kamen Rider games, like, okay. Give me a couple minutes. I'll think of one soon. Oh, what about... No, not that one. Oh, there's always... No. Come on, at least one of these has got to be good. Well, at least it's better than the first Ikari. Once again, we have K Amusement Leasing publishing an SNK game for some reason. And they thought it would be a good idea to publish a sequel to Ikari, one of the most frustrating playing experiences you could have on the Famicom. That game was annoyingly difficult unless you used a cheat code, and even then it took forever to complete. Ikari II is better, but it was also developed by Micronix, so there's a ceiling to how much better it could be. Ikari II is based on the arcade game Dokuganryu, which roughly means Realm of the Bellowers. I'm just going to assume that that works better in Japanese. In the US, the arcade game was known as Victory Road. And you'll notice that neither of these used Ikari in the name. In Japan, the game was known for its very odd slogan,
"Thou art selected. Escape from the darkness using your own skill and strategy."
That's not a translation of it either, it's in English. The story picks up at the end of the first Ikari. Ralph and Clark have succeeded in their mission, and on the way back they're abducted by aliens. So now they have a whole new group of people to run and gun through. Ikari II features 5 stages, and they are much shorter than the ones in the original Ikari. However, you only have 1 life, and there are no continues. Well, no official continues. After you die, you can enter this code, and that will let you continue where you left off. Though it is a long code, and you don't have much time to enter it. In the arcade, you could control what direction you were shooting using a rotary dial built into the joystick. In Ikari II on the Famicom, if you press and hold B, you'll fire your main gun and continue shooting in the same direction as you walk around. That's not a bad solution, but it seems poorly implemented here. I found myself turning after I pressed and held B, particularly if I shot and then changed direction immediately. It seems like there's a short delay before you lock into a direction. In Ikari II, you get to choose what weapon you want. Rather than switching when you pick up a power-up, getting one of those weapons increases the level of that weapon. You start with just machine gun at level 1 and hand grenades at level 1. And the maximum level for any weapon is 4. As you level up the machine gun, it increases its range, and then gets the ability to go through walls. However, the machine gun is pretty much useless compared to the other weapons. It's basically what you'd use if you have nothing else. And that can happen because continuing means that you lose all of your weapon power-ups. Instead, I would use the boomerang. You get it immediately, it has a better rate of fire than the machine gun, has better range than the machine gun, and starts out by being able to pass through walls. The rocket launcher doesn't really look like a rocket launcher. It's more of a flamethrower to me. It doesn't have much range, but it can destroy some tough objects, which will have additional power-ups in them. And it can injure some tough enemies, like these armored knights. The sword is the rarest weapon. It just spins around you when you hit the fire button, but it can deflect bullets and destroy any obstacles that you encounter. For secondary weapons, you have grenades or landmines. The landmines are effectively useless, so just use the grenades. You throw those by pressing the A button. There's also items that you can collect. The lightning bolts will either destroy all enemies on the screen, or freeze them in place. The wings let you pass through solid objects, but you can still be hit by enemies. The mask is armor, and it makes you invulnerable for a short period, but you can only fire straight ahead. The arrow gives you exactly one shot of a weapon that can destroy anything in one hit, and that includes bosses. The clock will send you back to the start of the previous stage, so I don't know why you would ever want to use that. And finally, the medicine bottle will heal you to full. All of the items have to be chosen, and then you have to press the A button when you return to the action. You'll still throw your grenade, you'll just also do the items effect. The arrow's an exception there, it's fired by pressing B. Now if you think this interface is messy and inconsistent, you haven't seen anything yet. While going through stages, you might encounter one of these square panels that'll suck you in and take you to an extra area. Sometimes it'll be a bonus stage, sometimes it'll be a boss. On the bonus stage, you have to shoot these targets that pop out, and you can only move left and right, or move your crosshair up and down. Then you press A to shoot your rifle. Now those of you paying attention might have noticed that usually you press B to fire your rifle. It's different on just this one screen. When you kill an enemy, they leave a heart behind. That's what this red blob is. And at some point, you'll encounter these bars. Just going inside one costs a few hearts. And within them you'll find stores that use hearts as currency, along with some people you can fight for additional hearts. And by additional hearts I mean 3. Given how many hearts you accumulate just playing, it's really not worth it. You can't get weapons from these shops, but you can get items. At the end of a stage, you'll find a boss. Stage 1 and 2 use the exact same boss. And assuming you can defeat it, then you collect a key and have to blow open one of these 2 statue heads. One head will put you in a tunnel that you have to fight your way through with only a machine gun. The other throws a random set of power-ups at you. Choose the one with the power-ups. When you emerge from the tunnel, you are at the most difficult portion of the game. The start of a level when there are 2 statues that fire giant exploding bullets at you. There are no invulnerability frames in Ikari II, so anything that does damage and doesn't go away sticks to you and just about kills you instantaneously. So being dropped down in the crossfire of 2 explosive firing statues who shoot rapidly, it means you're likely going to die. Ikari II is a sloppy mess of a game that isn't worth playing at all. You move so sluggishly it's hard to dodge anything, so the game mainly comes down to memorizing what's coming up and shooting it before it appears. The sad thing is, this really is an improvement over the first game. There's even a third game in the Ikari series coming up, and I honestly don't remember if I thought it was better or worse than this one. I guess we're gonna find out together. It's come up quite a bit that Konami is one of the bright spots of the Famicom disk system. You got other big developers and publishers who are consistently good on it, but they only made 2 or 3 disk system games. Konami, on the other hand, went heavy on the disk system, publishing more games for it than anyone except Nintendo. And Nintendo padded their numbers with a lot of 2-disc releases and reprints. And while not every Konami game was a hit, the quality of their games on the platform was generally a lot higher. Miracle Bokutte Upa is one of Konami's high points for the disk system. It might not make my top 3 games that you have to have for the Famicom disk system, but it would probably fit into my top 5. I have to point out that I covered this game already when I went through the Famicom library. Miracle was one of 3 games that Konami re-released on cartridge in 1993. That version added an easy mode and also lost some sound channels. Unless you're having a really hard time with Miracle, you probably want to play the disk system version. It's also considerably cheaper. The Miracle cartridge is one of the most expensive Famicom games. I talked about this when I discussed the cartridge, but if I don't say something here, then there will be plenty of comments about it. Miracle Bokutte Upa was not distributed on pirate carts as Baby Mario. The title they used was Mario Baby. The plot of Miracle Bokutte Upa is that Upa is a baby prince who was an amazingly advanced 1-month-old. While crawling around one day, something he shouldn't be capable of for at least another 6 months, Upa breaks a jar containing the Demon King Zai. Zai steals everyone's dreams, but because his powers don't work on babies, he also kidnaps all of them. Fortunately, fairies decide to help Upa, and they give him the Gara sword, which isn't a sword, it's a magic rattle. Since this mess is all his fault, Upa goes out to take care of it. Baby's Day Out winds up being a side-scrolling platformer, and Upa is an amazingly maneuverable baby. He can jump super high when you hit the A button, eat his way through mountains of cake, and I am positive that is not good for a 1-year-old. He doesn't even have teeth yet. And Upa can even swim in the depths of the ocean. And even people trying to sell you baby swimming classes will tell you that 1 month is too soon for a baby to swim. Upa does have a few weaknesses, though. If he falls about 20 feet, then he gets stunned for a few seconds. But he'll just bounce back. Babies are resilient that way. Naturally, Upa's strongest ability is the Gara sword. You hit B to swing the rattle and attack enemies, and any little monster that you strike becomes inflated. Then Upa can ride it up as a platform, or jump into the inflated enemy to knock them away, hurting whatever they collide with. The bosses at the end of every stage will either spit out a stream of enemies for you, or some enemies will drop into the arena, and you'll have to inflate those small fry and knock them around in order to defeat the boss. Every world has 3 stages, and the boss for the first 2 stages in every world is always this pig. Then the boss of the 3rd stage will be something different. Upa can also use the Gara sword to knock open bricks with his face on them, and these will contain useful items. The most helpful of which is a heart, which will expand Upa's life gauge. Initially, Upa only has 2 hearts, but as he consumes more of them, those hearts will multiply. The most he can have is 5, and hearts that you've earned like this are kept through the end of the world. So you don't lose them when you die, but you do lose them when you move on to the next world, or when you get a game over and continue. You can also find milk that will restore your health, and apples that are just worth points. Collecting an hourglass will freeze all enemies for a while, though if you hit them with the Gara sword, they'll still float up. And naturally you can find extra lives, though those are only in a couple of places, or found by guessing the correct chest at the end of a world. Finally, there's the bell which will make Upa stand up and run around. Upa moves faster like this, and he's invincible, but he can't swing the Gara sword. Maybe the most notable thing about Biomiracle, besides its protagonist, is the unique collection of level themes. Stage 1 takes place in a world made of candy and cakes, but after you've had your sweets, World 2 is all about vegetables. And I can't help but notice that Upa doesn't seem to eat any of the vegetables. World 3 is the boring one because that's the ice world. It's exactly what you'd expect an ice world to be. But then World 4 takes place inside a computer, and it has one of the most distinctive stages where everything is flipped upside down. World 5 is based on stationery, so paper products, rulers, pencils, tape. Maybe the person who came up with this one was just looking around on their desk for an idea. And then World 6 is all milk-themed. I didn't get that far while I was recording. World 7 wraps up the game at Zai's castle. Obviously, people loved it in Japan. Well, the ones who could play it. Apparently, it sold extremely poorly, and that was entirely due to the disc system really going out of style. However, since people liked Upa so much, he kept turning up in Konami games. He'll be featured in YY World 2, and he flies through space in the Parodius series. Like I said, Miracle Bokutte Upa is a classic 8-bit platformer. And if you want to play it, the disc system version is the one to get. This is a game with a lot of charm and a lot of Konami polish. And even though I'm only in April in my progression, I'm just going to say that this is the FDS's Game of the Year for 1988. There's something interesting in the fumbling attempts to make a fighting game that occurred before Street Fighter II figured out the formula. The idea had obvious appeal from a game design standpoint. Put two people in a room and have them hit each other until one falls down. And there's something inherently cinematic about having a large cast of weird characters, each with their own unique style of martial arts. And throughout the 1980s, there were plenty of attempts that did pretty well for themselves. But nothing that took the world by storm. People played them, sometimes enjoyed them, and then moved on. Fuuun Shourin Ken Onkoku no Mao is another one of those paving stones on the road to Street Fighter II. In fact, I'd say I can see a bit of the original Street Fighter DNA in this one. But as you might be able to tell, since the fighting game genre didn't take off in 1988, it didn't have that magic touch. Onkoku no Mao is a sequel to the original Fuuun Shourin Ken. That game was released almost precisely 1 year before this one. It missed the anniversary by only a few days. So what new features has the new year brought? Well, I think the graphics look a lot better. I also think it controls better. Special moves have been added to the game. Both you and your opponent now have a health bar, which brings this one step closer to a modern fighting game. But there's a lot less of the game here. There's only 5 opponents total, though you do fight 2 of them twice. The plot of the game is that 1 year after Shin defeated the 3 Demon Lords, a new Dark Demon Lord showed up and started brainwashing people and doing evil magic. Naturally, Shin has to go punch him until he stops. The controls while you're fighting might require a little bit of time to get used to. A punches and B kicks. So far, so good. And there's a high, medium, and low version of each of those, depending on if you're pressing up, down, or no direction. Blocking is performed by pushing in a direction, either up, down, or toward the opponent. Blocking only covers one region for attacks, so up would block high attacks, toward your opponent blocks medium attacks, down blocks low attacks. Since there aren't any tells about which direction someone will be attacking, so you can't really effectively block, even though you have the ability to. You can press A and B to jump, And if you're holding left and right as you hit A and B, you'll move in those directions as well. However, if you hold down and press A and B, then you'll perform a special attack. Shin has 3 special attacks, and you rotate through which one you'll perform by pressing select. You know which special attack is selected by what color the gem next to your life bar is. Performing a special attack uses up some energy, and this is automatically restored over time. The yellow attack is the Senju Hokkaidan, or the Thousand Hand Destruction Shot. This uses all of your special attack power to stand in place and punch repeatedly. It is by far the worst option you could do. The red attack is the Tensho Toge Senkyoku, or Divine Spear Kick. With it, you jump up into the air and then do a spiraling kick downward. You can do 2 of these before you run out of power. This will do a lot of damage if it connects, but it is kind of difficult to hit someone with it. Finally, the blue ability is the Hienzan Mayashi, or Flying Swallow Flash Kick. It's just a small little hopping jump kick, and it's completely broken. It does a lot better damage than your regular attacks, has reach, and it uses up so little attack power that you'll really have to spam it to ever run out. Just a 1-second pause between attacks and you can do it forever. And the enemies in Onkoku no Mao are so overwhelming, you probably are going to have to abuse it if you want to get through the game. This is the first fight, against a clone of Shin that was created by the wizard. Yeah, I'm not lasting very long in this. Copy Shin here can take you down in 5 hits. While if you were just using regular attacks, you'd have to hit him 15 to 20 times. And remember that there's no effective blocking in this game. If you don't use the jump kick, which both gives you more room and does extra damage, you're probably going to get your teeth kicked in. Once you learn to use the jump kick to beat an opponent, then you're given a choice of going left or right. There are 6 battles you have to clear before you fight the evil wizard, and this decision occurs after each of them. Which way you go determines who you're fighting. There are 3 opponents that you fight on the road in between the copy and the wizard, and one of them is so overwhelmingly strong that it has a reputation for being effectively impossible. Tairu here has a special attack very similar to yours, where he just unleashes a continuous combo, and if you're next to him when he does that, you're dead. All combat is 1 round, so if you're knocked out, it's game over. And there's only 3 continues in this game. On the other hand, when you continue, you're given the option to choose what path you want again, so you could just pick the other direction and not fight Tairu. Shoho is this tall guy, and he can do a high jumping attack, but that attack is relatively easy to avoid, and then you jump kick him back. Finally, there's Godamon, a Buddhist monk who's mastered illusion magic. He can disappear and reappear. He isn't that powerful, but the way that he keeps running away from you can drag the fight out. There are stage hazards as well, and these actually vary a bit as you play. So just because you had a windstorm when you chose a path one time, doesn't mean you'll have a windstorm next time. Lightning strikes can affect both you and your opponent, while is it snow? It's coming down awfully slow to be anything else. Well, it only hurts you, not them. There's a 2-player mode where you can take on one of your friends, but you both have to play as Shin, and only player 1 can choose special abilities. Maybe the most unusual feature of Onkoku no Mao is something that wasn't advertised and not mentioned on the box. If you hold down A and press start at the title screen, then when you get into a battle, it's in 3D. Okay, you're seeing 2 side-by-side images here. That's because this is designed for the Famicom 3D system. A pair of shutter LCD glasses. There's an LCD in front of each eye, and when the glasses are connected to the Famicom, then the LCD turns off and on 30 times a second. By alternating left and right eyes, you see half of the flickering image, and then your brain puts it together as 3D. In Onkoku no Mao, the 3D effect isn't really anything that special. It just makes the characters pop out a little bit. That's probably why people overlook this one as a 3D game. In Japan, Onkoku no Mao doesn't have much of a following. Pretty much everyone immediately catches on that the only way to advance is by using that jump kick, and the 2-player mode is just too limited to be much fun. It's a shame that Onkoku no Mao has such significant improvements over the original Fuuun Shourin Ken when it winds up falling so short in other areas. It is interesting that you can feel the evolutionary groping toward what Street Fighter II would be. This is probably closer to it than any other early fighting game I've played, except, well, Street Fighter. It would be very easy to pass this off as one of those pirate carts that came out in the late 90s and was copying the fighting games of that time period. Even if it winds up being frustrating and not a whole lot of fun, Onkoku no Mao was a really good attempt. Sure have been a lot of detective clubs lately. There's a convenient linguistic coincidence where the kanji that make up the word club in Japanese pretty much convey the same meaning as the English word club. Oddly enough, Famicom Tantei Club doesn't have a Tantei Club in it. There is a detective agency, but they're not involved for most of the game. The title might be the legacy of the game's original working title, Shonen Tanteidan, or Boy Detectives. It would have been set in a high school and involved some Hardy Boys style stuff. After Nintendo was internally unhappy with Tokimeki High School, this game was pivoted to be a horror mystery. Developer Yoshitaka Sakamoto, who you might best know for creating Metroid, wrote a short novel for the game's story, and then they worked to translate that novel into this game. It gives the structure of Famicom Tantei Club a much stronger narrative feel than a lot of the mystery games at the time. The overall plot is that you're a detective who has lost their memory. The only clue that you have is the name of a village and possibly the name of a family. So following up those clues, you arrive at their house and find out that the family matriarch has recently died under suspicious circumstances. There's also a story in this remote town that the dead will rise to take their revenge on the living, and that in this town they practice burial instead of cremation. As you start poking into things, you keep having odd conversations or discovering things that wind up not being really there. They're your memories getting recovered rather than what's happening. About a quarter of the way through the story, people start turning up dead, and as your suspect list gets smaller as a result, you exhume that first body and discover the wrong person in the grave. So overall, a pretty good hook for a mystery story. Where I left off my synopsis was about the end of Disc 1. Famicom Tantei Club was Nintendo's second 2-disc release, and due to delays, it takes almost 2 months for the second half to get released. So you'd get to that cliffhanger, and then just have to wait. As for how the game works, well, it's your standard mystery adventure game. You have a menu of verbs, and sometimes when you select one, then you get a menu of nouns. Or you might point at something in the picture that you want to examine. Like most mystery adventure games, Famicom Tantei Club is primarily driven by dialogue. So you'll call over somebody who you want to interrogate, and then ask them about a list of subjects until you have the piece of information you need to move on. I had enough time to play through the first disc while I was recording, and I didn't notice any of the usual adventure game gotchas. Things like requiring that you do the same action over and over again, and then suddenly something changes, and you're not going to spend a lot of time wandering to locations hoping that something has changed. Maybe the biggest trick in the game is that you'll sometimes have to go back to the office, and then use a menu command to recall one of your lost memories. But for the most part, Famicom Tantei Club seems to be playing fair with you. Now in 1988, the Famicom Disk System was toast. Even the rare great game that was getting released for it vanished without a trace. So it was really shocking when Famicom Tantei Club sold 500,000 copies. It was one of the hottest video games in Japan in 1988. Roughly 1 in 9 people who owned a disk system bought a copy of this game. And it was a 2-part game, so people had to get both discs. Naturally, Nintendo's re-released it a few times, like when they put both discs on a single Game Boy Advance cartridge. But the version you might be familiar with is the Switch port that Nintendo made in 2020. That version was released internationally, making it the first Nintendo adventure game that was available in English. And of course, there's the sequel. That game gets released about a year after this. As you might expect, there's a lot of Japanese fans of Famicom Tantei Club. It's one of the most beloved adventure games of that era. And while I wouldn't call it my favorite adventure game from that period, I like Shin Onigashima better. Famicom Tantei Club is a great example of the mystery adventure game genre. I really like the tone and the progress of the storytelling in this game. That does mean that you'll likely zip through it, but it is a pretty good time. So, I made a pretty big mistake with this one. Elysion is an RPG where you choose your character at the start. And I made my choice based on what I thought would be the most interesting to play through the whole game, not the one that could see the most content in the time I had to record. So I made effectively no progress here, spending almost all of my time grinding out levels in a small area. Well, live and learn. Maybe next time I have this choice, I'll remember to pick better. The title Elysion is actually a bit of a misnomer. It's supposed to be Elysium, the good afterlife in Greek mythology. This is one of those instances where a foreign word got a little bit scrambled going to Japanese, and then a little bit more scrambled going to a Latin alphabet. Elysion started as a PC 98 game, and from what I can tell, it made almost no impact there. And then when released on the Famicom, it also made almost no impact. The story in Elysion is pretty generic. There's a world with 5 continents, and they each have a different race on them. And then there was a Dark Lord who got defeated, but the Dark Lord is coming back. So now a champion from each of those races goes to the 5th continent to start their quest there to defeat the Dark Lord. At the outset, you have to select which of the 4 races you'll be. Conveniently, they all line up with RPG classes. Warrior, Wizard, Thief, Priest. Here's where I made my big screw-up. When you have a class selection, the guy who doesn't do anything except hit things is by far the easiest one to play as. I foolishly chose Wizard, thinking I could show off a bit more of the game's spell system. But the Wizard is very physically weak, and you're completely dependent upon physical attacks for the start of the game. I'm not even sure it would improve if I got further, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The very first thing you do in Elysion is turn around. You have to go into the building that you've apparently just exited and talk to the king. You can't talk to anyone else, just the king. The king needs you to recover 2 scrolls and a ring from the dungeon. The dungeon that's conveniently located in the same building. After you talk to the king, you're able to talk to the queen and princess, though they can't do anything for you at the moment. And then you head next door to go check out the dungeon. Elysion is often described as an action RPG, but it really isn't. Enemies only move while you do, similar to Rogue or Super Hot. Wait, I can't reference Super Hot if I'm talking about retro gaming. So, similar to Rogue. When you bump up against one, and you do have to be right up against them, you can press the A button to swing your sword. In the upper left, you've got your hit points, your magic points, and damage. And that damage is both the damage you take from enemies, and the damage you deal to enemies. So you can swing your weapon and see what numbers pop up in the upper left. I said that you have to be right next to enemies to hit them, but I need to make it very clear that that is literally right next to them, as in 0 pixels between you. The animation of the sword isn't actually you swinging at enemies. Another way that Elysion is not an action RPG. It's just indicating that you're attacking whatever you're next to. Elysion has a Dragon Quest style menu, though the commands are a bit different and don't work quite the same way. Starting at the top left, you have status, and what that does is obvious. Then beside that, you have magic. The magic system is just like Dragon Quest. You have magic points and spells that you can gain per level. The wizard starts with 2 of them, Heal and Spark. Spark does damage to all of the enemies around you, not just a targeted attack. And later on when I got confused, which didn't really seem to do anything, it also targeted all of the enemies in range. Next there's the equipment screen, and what equipment you can put on is limited by your strength. Each piece of gear has a certain amount of weight, and you can only wear a certain amount of weight. That limit increases with your level. Also on the equipment screen, you can use health potions. Back to the menu, next to it is Read, which I didn't find anything to read. Then we have Search, which will tell you if there are hidden treasure chests nearby, or if a treasure chest is trapped. Drink is useful for the fountains that populate the game. They could restore some health or some magic. At the start of the game, when you have to grind up a few levels before you can do anything, there's a health fountain right there that you can use to refresh yourself. The Open command can open treasure chests and doors, of course. It's also used to climb ladders for some reason. The very last command in the menu is Talk, which should tell you how valuable it is. When I played Elysion, I needed to grind up to level 4 before I could survive any distance from the fountain. When you die, you lose all of your experience you've gained since your previous level up, so that can be pretty annoying. Once I could finally explore further in the dungeon, I could check out some treasure chests, go down to this magic fountain, and then I stepped on this teleporter when I didn't know what it did. That got me stuck in a maze where skeletons spawned that could kill me in one hit. I took advantage of the fact that enemies despawn if they go off the screen, and I managed to work my way around to this hidden door that I couldn't manage to bash open. I managed to recover 2 of the scrolls by the time I had to stop, though not the ring. And that was an enormous problem, because until you complete the first quest, you can't use inns, and inns are how you get your password. Inns are also how you can sell off things that are filling up your limited inventory spaces. Inns are how you're supposed to replenish your health and magic too. So I was about an hour and a half into the game, and I couldn't save my game. If I had to pick one word to describe Elysion, it would be off-kilter. It's a game with a lot of systems, but it doesn't do any of them right. Maybe the most interesting thing about it is that there's a unique ending for each of the 4 races. The thing is, I don't know anyone who could tolerate this game long enough to get all 4 endings. It's not the worst thing on the Famicom, but Elysion is still very mediocre. While playing Captain Tsubasa, I was working my way through an outline for this audio track. In about 20 minutes, I thought I had my general thrust. Basically, conceptually interesting but deeply flawed. Then something happened around my 3rd match. I started really getting into it. When I was cheering after a particularly cool-looking goal, I knew there was something special in Captain Tsubasa. Captain Tsubasa was an extremely popular comic and cartoon about a kid who loved to play soccer. And it wasn't just popular in Japan, it was shown around the world and was a big hit pretty much everywhere except the US. This game was released right as the comic was ending its run. It was initially scheduled to come out in 1986, though I strongly doubt whatever game they were working on for a 1986 release looked like this. Rather than try to capture the action of a sport that has 22 players on the field at the same time, Captain Tsubasa is a strategy game. The game clock runs while the player has possession of the ball and is moving around the field. You're not really controlling the player at the top of the screen, though. What you're doing is controlling the dot on the soccer pitch below it. All of the players have 3 offensive stats and 3 defensive stats. And these stats correspond to each other. There's one for dribbling, how well you do it, or how well you can steal from someone. A stat for passing, or for how well you can intercept a pass. And a stat for shooting, or how well you can block that shot. All of the characters have stamina as well, and that decreases while they have possession of the ball. If someone's worn down, they won't perform as well, so have them pass the ball to somebody who isn't as tired. As you're dribbling the ball upfield, you can press the A button to interrupt, and then you can shoot or pass immediately. Or you might find yourself confronted by a number of players from the opposing team. In these situations, you press left to select pass, up to select dribble, or right to select shoot. And if you select pass, you're given the choice of 4 players you could send the ball to. One of the biggest weaknesses of Captain Tsubasa is that you can't see the positions of the other players on the field unless you bring up one of these menus. When you find yourself confronted by a large group, it still might be worth it to shoot rather than try to pass or dribble. If you're far back, they're unlikely to attempt to block a shot, and you could get the ball pretty far upfield and then work to recover it. Obviously, the best thing in Captain Tsubasa are the dramatic action shots for gameplay. The animation is admittedly a bit limited, but it does allow for some cool moments. If you pass the ball to somebody close to the goal, then instead of receiving it, you might get the option to take a shot, and that will cause them to do a special move that has a better chance of making it past the goalkeeper. As for your goalie, when your opponents make a shot, you get 2 options for how to defend the goal. You could try to grab the ball, or you can try to knock it away. Knocking it away has a higher chance of success usually. Even if it makes it past the goalie, the ball could bounce off one of the posts. At halftime, you have the ability to chat with your team members. You could pick out any character from the show and find out how they're feeling. In between matches, when you're in the locker room, you can get a password that will let you continue. Captain Tsubasa is a pretty long game, and you'll have to win a lot of soccer matches before you complete it. So that password is absolutely necessary. A big weakness of Captain Tsubasa is Tsubasa himself. His stats are about twice as high as every other character, and as a result, a lot of the game can come down to get the ball to Tsubasa, and he can walk it into the goal. It seems like this disparity will improve a little bit because there's a linear stat growth that occurs in between matches. So effectively, stat increases on your weaker characters are twice as effective as stat increases on Tsubasa. But he's still going to be your strongest character by far at the end of the game. As you might expect for such a popular property, there are a lot of Captain Tsubasa games. However, only one more was released on the Famicom. This game was also released in the US, though since nobody knew who Captain Tsubasa was here, they didn't use the license. Instead, all of the characters are redrawn, and it was released as Tecmo Cup Soccer. I can't say I think Captain Tsubasa is a great game. It's just a little bit too simple, and there's a few minor flaws that I think bring it down. But I can see why this is a very popular game in Japan. Captain Tsubasa is one of the most beloved Famicom games, and it's very easy to get into it. I'm actually looking forward to playing the sequel since I think it addresses most of my complaints. Sabaku no Kitsune is our first, actually Nazi game, and that makes it necessary to go over a few things up front. The game is about Erwin Rommel. Sabaku no Kitsune means Desert Fox, which is his nickname, and Rommel has been whitewashed a lot to make him the good Nazi. People will say he was just being a good soldier, just following orders. And he did try to kill Hitler. However, Rommel was deeply involved in Nazi Party politics, took part in atrocities, and that opposition of Hitler didn't have a lot to do with Hitler's politics or policies. Rommel was a Nazi and a bad guy. However, he was also the Germans' one competent general, and that has allowed people to gloss over the uglier aspects of him, and turned him into a popular figure for war games. Sabaku no Kitsune is a wargame about Rommel's North African campaign against the British. The game has 5 scenarios in it, though 2 of the maps are reused. Before the battle starts, you'll be given a distribution of units, and you can swap these out 1 for 1. There's no variable point cost for them. You'll also notice, if you're playing on any scenario except the first one, that the AI gets a lot more units than you do. This is because the AI is dumb as a post, something I'll come back to in a little bit. The goal on every map is to defeat the enemy command unit. It's marked on the map with a little flag, which means that for you, it's a swastika. The gameplay occurs in turns where you move all of your forces, and then the opponent moves all of their forces. The types of units you can have are tanks, armored cars, troop transports, supply cars, infantry, artillery, anti-aircraft, bombers, and fighters. Supposedly, they all have units that they're strong or weak against, though in practice, my tanks were often getting devastated by units they were supposed to overwhelm. It seems to work sometimes, and that made me think that the battles have a pretty significant random element to them. Units have a certain amount of movement that they can do each turn, and that movement follows the path that the cursor takes, not the range of movement that they can do. So if you double back with the cursor, that counts as movement of that unit. It means that if you make a mistake, you have to back out of the movement command and then redo it. However, if you bump up against an enemy unit as you're moving, that's it, you're locked in. The only thing you can do then is choose whether or not to attack. Friendly units can't pass through each other either, even aircraft. One aspect of Sabaku no Kitsune that I wasn't able to get into was the supply system. As units do things, it consumes fuel and ammo, and you might have to return to certain locations to get more. Or you could end movement next to a supply truck. Similarly, infantry can end their movement next to a troop transport, then board it, and then when the troop transport is finished moving, they can unload the infantry. As you move around on the map, all of the terrain is passable. I noticed on the map I was playing that there were 3 passes through the mountains, so I quickly moved into position to hold those. And then the enemy just went around me. The AI here is really bad. I mean, really bad. The only thing it can do is push forward and attack. It'll throw weak forces up against stronger ones, let you run circles around it, and generally let you pick it apart piece by piece. I doubt that even giving it an overwhelming numerical advantage will help it. If you have any kind of skill at strategy games, you'll be able to roll right over this AI. Once you take out the enemy command unit, you win the scenario, and get personal congratulations from Adolf Hitler. Kemco's original plan for this game was that if players could beat all 5 scenarios, they could send in a password that they got, and receive a letter of congratulations signed by Adolf Hitler. For some reason, they didn't go through with that one. I was prepared to be a lot more forgiving with Sabaku no Kitsune. Most great military leaders through history were pretty awful people, and Rommel's been a popular subject for strategy games going back into the 1960s. But congratulations from Hitler cinched it for me. This is a pro-Nazi game. It's one thing to have you refight the battles of a war. It's another thing when the player is supposed to take pride in having Hitler congratulate them for doing a good job. So Sabaku no Kitsune is going back into my collection bin, and it's not coming back out. Konami, what are you even doing? And I don't mean making cool games. The lineage of Final Commando Yokai Dochuki is actually a bit messy. And it's not helped that Konami seems to have wanted to just tie this into two of their other games. First, there was the arcade game Jackal. And yes, it went by the title Jackal even in Japan. And since this game was pretty well received, naturally there would be a home port. But rather than make a direct port, Konami wound up tweaking the game quite a bit, and then wound up retitling it Final Commando Yokai Dochuki. Yokai Dochuki meaning Red Fortress. And that also means that they tied this game into the Commando series, which makes a little bit of sense since there are some overlapping things, and then had a couple of loose nods toward the Contra series. Don't worry, they don't become aliens at the end. Though that would be in keeping with what Konami usually does. Yokai Dochuki greatly restricted your movement, and so you'd have to just vertically scroll through all of the stages. However, this disk system release is the stripped down version of the game. The full version was released on cartridge in the United States. The NES version of Jackal had the side-scrolling reinstated, had 2 additional stages, and basically was a much more complete game. So if you're going to play this one, the disk system version is probably the one you least want to play. It's still pretty good, it's just you could be playing the same game only better. The plot of Yokai Dochuki is given after the title screen in English. You know, I'm beginning to suspect that this game wasn't made for the Japanese market. In short, the plot is about a bunch of captured soldiers that you're trying to rescue, and you'll need a pocket full of miracles and the ferocity of a wild bloody rose to rescue them. That last part is straight from the text. In Yokai Dochuki, you're driving a jeep through enemy territory. Pressing the B button will fire a machine gun that always points in an upward direction, and the A button will launch explosives in the direction that you're facing. The explosives are stronger, have an area of effect, and can damage things that the machine gun sometimes can't. So they wind up being your primary method of attacking. Progress through the stage is always by going up, but this isn't ratchet scrolling. You can turn around and go back. In fact, there's plenty of times where it's really helpful to go forward, clear out some enemies, and then double back. And that's because prisoners are held in the buildings, and when you blow them open, they pop out. You have to pull your jeep alongside them to pick them up. If it's one of the buildings that says help, it'll have multiple people inside it. But if it's just one of the small buildings with a door, then one person will come out and they'll be flashing. Rescuing the flashing person upgrades your explosive weapon. It starts out as a grenade, which is actually kind of helpful because it passes over things. And getting it upgraded will turn it into a missile. Upgrading it again will expand the explosion horizontally, while the final upgrade will expand the explosion vertically. The explosions not only defeat enemy forces, but they can also take out incoming missiles, which makes them pretty valuable. Getting hit by anything will kill you in Yokai Dochuki. When that happens, you're back to just the grenade as your explosive weapon, and you'll lose most of the prisoners that you were carrying, though a few may spill out to be recollected. As you're progressing through the stage, you'll see the rescue helicopter pass overhead, and that's a signal that you're approaching the helipad. At the helipad, you'll need to wait until everyone's unloaded, and then when you drive away, the helicopter will take off again. Fortunately, the prisoners aren't vulnerable to getting shot, either by the enemy or through friendly fire. If you unload enough prisoners at once, then it counts as a power-up. Though on most stages, it's easier to just find one of the flashing guys. You have one more weapon in your arsenal, and that's your jeep itself. You can drive right over enemy soldiers, though that's generally a bad idea because they could shoot at you at any moment. At the end of every stage is a boss. Like here at the end of the first stage, you've got these statue heads that require a ton of shots to defeat, as tanks and homing missiles continuously spawn in. It's a pretty challenging fight. And then the rest of the bosses are pushovers. This boat takes 5 shots. This helicopter mainly exists for you to try running over troops. This fortress is just 5 easy targets. And then the titular red fortress, well, the only reason I got killed on it was because I didn't realize it made craters in the ground that were impassable. That boss has a second phase, but still, Yokai Yosai is not a difficult game. Though to make up for that, there are no continues. Still, I expect most people could beat it pretty fast. There are two different ways that you can play a two-player mode here. First, you could just each have jeeps, but that's for boring people. The other option is that one player can drive the jeep and the other player can shoot the guns, and that includes being able to aim their explosive shot independently. Or I guess if you had a rapid-fire controller and rubber banded the buttons down, you could turn this into a twin-stick shooter. Yokai Yosai has got a pretty good reputation in Japan. I mean, it's a Konami action game. They didn't have a lot of misses back then. Though, even Japanese players are aware that the US got the better version. However, it seems that Yokai Yosai sold very poorly at the time. A combination of being on the disk system and action games becoming less popular at that moment. Since this really does seem to be made for the US market, I don't think Konami was really hurt by those poor sales, but this does feel like the beginning of the end for their involvement with the disk system. And, as I said, Yokai Yosai is pretty good. It is firmly B-tier Konami, but B-tier Konami's absolute peak for nearly anybody else. It is a little bit easy, and you'll definitely want to play the US version rather than this one, but it's a pretty enjoyable time. It's definitely one of the highlights of the disk system's library. The obvious question that comes up when talking about Deep Dungeon 3 is, what are Deep Dungeon 1 and 2? They were simple little RPGs released on the Famicom disk system by Dog, Square's publishing label for smaller developers. Well, Dog was a disaster, and the disk system is just about dead. So when it came time for Deep Dungeon 3, it was released on a cartridge. The Deep Dungeon series is by Hummingbird Soft, who are best known for, well, the Deep Dungeon series. Their other major success was a series of RPGs on computers based on Lodos to Senki, or Record of the Lodos War, as you may know it. The story of Deep Dungeon is that there's a kid, there's a dungeon, there's monsters coming out of the dungeon, so the kid decides to kill all the monsters. Now you might think I'm being reductive there, but I really am not. The game has a battery save, and let's take a quick look at the other players on the cartridge. 2 other games, and neither progress beyond level 1. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's a bad sign. In fairness, I had a save game on here that I deleted to make this video. It was at level 2. When you start the game, you're given the option to create up to 3 additional characters who will represent your childhood friends that decided to follow you into the murder hole. The main character is always a swordsman, but you can choose among 3 classes for the other 3 characters. So yes, you're obviously going to choose one of each. Those classes are Hunter, Priest, and Mage. Once you pick out names for everybody, we head off on an adventure. And the very first thing you're going to notice is that Deep Dungeon 3 is a cheap wizardry clone. In fact, it reminds me of the wizardry clones that I used to make back when I was a kid. Very basic dungeon design, a minimal amount of equipment and options, and you pad the game out by making progression incredibly slow. In Japan, the people who remember Deep Dungeon basically remember it for that. The bargain bin wizardry that you got because you couldn't afford wizardry. But there's deeper problems with it than that. Let's say that a character dies. In that circumstance, your best solution is to hit reset and just reload. You can walk back to town and pay a whole lot of money to get them revived, though early on you're not going to have enough. Or you could always go back to the inn. There's an option there to remove a character from the party. Then you could just create a new one and... whoops! There is no way to create a new character. You can only create characters when you're starting a whole new game. And believe me, I spent a lot of time going, well, this can't possibly be right. Read through the manual, checked with all the houses. Nope. You can permanently remove a character from your party and then be permanently stuck down a party member. So moving past that, the town in Deep Dungeon 3 is another dungeon floor, but there's really only a few things that matter here. The equipment shop, the item shop, the inn where you can pay to spend the night to recover, and you can save your game, the temple where you can heal status effects and learn new priest spells, and the mage school where you can learn wizard spells. And then you just fight your way through the dungeon. As you move through the dungeon, the enemy encounter rate is based on time, not steps. So if you stand in place for a while, you'll get attacked. There's a huge variance in both enemies and how much damage they do. Enemies that can hit you for 1 damage might also be able to hit you for 15, and that's on the first floor of the dungeon. These skeletons are much nastier than all of the other enemies on the floor, so when you encounter them, the best option is to just run away. The wild swings of the random number generator means you pretty much just have to hang out near the stairs until you're about level 4. However, as you increase in levels, the size of the enemy groups you encounter also increase. The game is trying to keep pace with the player, but it's already very unbalanced. You can press the B button while you're walking around to open up a menu, and that has the usual inventory stuff, cast a spell, get your status. There's also talk on the menu, which implies that you'll encounter people in the dungeon to converse with. Deep Dungeon 3 was followed up by Deep Dungeon 4, but that one wasn't published by Square. It seems like there was a big push for Deep Dungeon 3, or at least I found lots of advertising material and tie-in books. And I get the impression that the game was not a success. My impression from the time I spent with it, before I apparently hit the really steep experience curve, was that if you absolutely, positively had to play a dungeon crawler, yeah, I suppose Deep Dungeon 3 would do it. However, this is a game whose only claim to fame is that it looks just like a better game. That is not a ringing endorsement for the Deep Dungeon series. Am I ever going to stop feeling the need to apologize for my format when I hit an adventure game? Probably not. The limited time I have to play and edit these videos means I have to play the adventure games with a walkthrough in front of me and not really working on the text. And I really did need that video walkthrough in front of me for this one. I found some people commenting on the game that they could spend 2 hours trying to identify the exact pixel that they needed to examine to continue. So while it's hard for me to be fair in my judgment, I've got to say, Meitantei Holmes' Kiri no London Satsujin Jiken is not making a strong impression. Meitantei is a title used in Japanese for detectives, and so the Sherlock Holmes stories are known over there as Meitantei Holmes. And the rest of the title translates to something like The Case of the Foggy London Murder. Except it doesn't start out as a murder case, and there's no fog, and I really wouldn't call the setting London. The story kicks off when Veronica Norden arrives at Baker Street. Not 221B, just Baker Street. Her father, Professor Norden, is missing. Naturally, Holmes chooses to investigate. This is the second Sherlock Holmes game by Toa Chiki, and no matter what I say about Kiri no London Satsujin Jiken, this game is miles better than that one. It was supposedly an action game, and it seemed to mainly involve Holmes walking around streets of different cities in Great Britain and killing innocent members of the general public to steal their money. This one goes for just the straight-up mystery adventure game route. It's doing the same thing that we've seen a few times now. We've got a menu on the right-hand side where we can select to talk to people about things, show them evidence, make deductions by choosing this question mark. Getting the correct responses will let you move on to the next area where you repeat the process. One thing about this game is that it really loves repeated questioning. In one conversation I had to speak to someone about a topic 8 times. And often their first response will be, "I don't know anything about that." And then if you ask again immediately, they go, "Oh wait, yes I do." It's an unnatural way to do this, and honestly, it's pretty frustrating. At some scenes, you can break out your magnifying glass and examine things around the area. This requires extreme precision. If the glass isn't on exactly the right pixel, then you don't get the clue. And in one instance early on, there's nothing telling you that you're supposed to search that one particular spot of the wall. Even worse is exploring London. Put some sarcastic finger quotes around that London. Really, the only thing that this city has in common with London is that there's a river in it. Anyway, you can enter roughly 30 buildings on the map. No, they won't tell you which ones they are. You'll just have to walk up to them to figure out what they are. And the whole map is incredibly confusing since buildings are basically plopped down randomly. Okay, maybe that's another thing that the map has in common with the real London. You can take cabs around to locations that you know the name of. Not all of them, but enough that it's probably something that you're going to need to do. I'm about to reveal the big twist in the game here, but it's the exact same twist that every single piece of Sherlock Holmes media not based on Conan Doyle's stories has. Moriarty's behind everything. As a plot twist, it's kind of boring. And as a mystery adventure game, Meitantei Holmes' Kiri no London Satsujin Jiken isn't worth the effort. The mystery is obfuscated through bad gameplay. Unfortunately, Chou-Wakusei releases one more Sherlock Holmes game before we're through. But since it's by Chou-Wakusei, I'm not expecting an awful lot from it. Kamen no Ninja Akakage never had a chance. It was published by Toei Animation and developed by Shoei Systems, the people who made the Hokuto no Ken games for Toei. They're also responsible for SWAT and Sukaban Deka 3, so what we have here is a bad publisher working with their pet bad developer and releasing a bad game. Kamen no Ninja Akakage was a very long-running franchise in Japan. It started as a live-action show in the 60s, and then transitioned to animation in the 1980s. That's what the Famicom game is from. It's based on attempts to revive the series as a comic and cartoon. Except from what I'm seeing, it was not popular. It seems like they cut the production short and didn't even air all of the episodes. And the show sounds about as generic as you can get. Akakage, whose name means Red Shadow, is a ninja in a red mask that goes around fighting evil. And that's really all there is to it. Honestly, it's fairly generic, which I guess is why this game was the last gasp of the franchise for 25 years. Then there was a TV movie, and then nothing else. I don't even have a story for this game. I don't have a manual. The game seems to exist mainly as a footnote to a footnote, so I don't really know what your ultimate goal is here. I'm gonna guess kidnapped princess? Kamen no Ninja Akakage is a side-scrolling action game, and your only real goal is to get to the far end of the stage and defeat the boss. Sometimes there's a boss at the beginning of the stage, though. One of the weirder quirks of the game is that 2 enemies will spawn on the screen at a time, and only 2. So if they get stuck for some reason, nothing happens unless you hit them. Enemies continuously spawn in so that there's 2 of them on the screen, and when you cross the boundary between 2 different enemy types, all of the previous ones just vanish. Enemies can drop white orbs that restore some health, or red orbs that make you invisible for a short time. That said, you're probably better off just running from all the enemies that appear. You don't get anything by fighting them, and they just keep coming forever. Many of the bosses that you face will only be vulnerable to a specific weapon. You start out with a sword and shuriken, and you switch your weapons by pressing start, hitting left and right to select what you want, and then hitting A, which is the jump button. Doing that also unpauses the game and makes you jump. The birds that you encounter have to be taken out by shuriken, and this big guy has to be defeated with your sword. And then you get to the frog. The frog requires that you throw bombs into its open mouth, except you don't start with bombs. So where do you get them? Well, on some stages you'll find this heart marker, and if you stand below it and press up, you'll talk to this guy who will give you an upgrade. If you miss getting the bombs, then you're stuck when you reach the frog. Other things that you can get from him are ninja abilities, like throwing a smoke bomb that'll make you indestructible for a little while. These aren't necessarily the best things to use because it doesn't switch away from the ability after you activate it, so it's very easy to use it multiple times even though you have a limited quantity. You also start with the ability to summon one of your allies. Aokage is fast and throws a boomerang, while Shirokage is slower and has a staff. Everything seems to die in one hit anyway, so I don't know why you'd bring out Shirokage. You activate your ninja abilities and summon your allies by pausing the game and then pressing up and down to switch between the menus. Kamen no Ninja Akakage is not a difficult game. It took me a while to understand how the systems worked, but once I knew that I should just be running past things, the game became pretty simple. Although the jump over these pits is just about pixel perfect. In fact, the jumping is the worst aspect of this game. You have a tendency to stick on things, or bonk your head on the top of the screen. Doing any kind of platforming is annoying here. And when you're on top of a platform, you can't drop down below it. So in general, it's better to stay on the ground. At least that way the enemies spawning in from the top of the screen get stuck above you. This is a clunky game to play, but I don't think the feel for the controls really comes across in the video. It just feels off in some ways. Like how you should always use the shuriken, although it resets you back to the sword after every level. Or how you can bring up the upgrade screen at any time, but the only actual way to get an upgrade is to press up when you're below the hearts. And the game changes after the 6th stage, which is as far as I got. It becomes something with a kind of first-person maze. Kamen no Ninja Akakage is a mediocre game. It's not the absolute worst, but it's definitely not one that you'd go out of your way for. Maybe the best thing about it is that there's another Kamen no Ninja Famicom game, but the main character of that one is a parody of Akakage. And needless to say, Capcom made a better game. I think Shogun might be the weirdest Famicom game. The gameplay itself is a bit strange, but the weirdness runs a lot deeper than that. Shogun is based on the novel by James Clavell. It was a very popular book in the 1970s that became an extremely popular TV miniseries. The book is loosely based on the life of William Adams, a European who arrived in Japan in the mid-16th century and was at least around for most of the Sengoku period. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because he's also the inspiration for the main character of the Neo video games. So this is a game based on a book that's all about relating Japanese history and culture through the eyes of a European. In fact, the label of the game is entirely English text. Kind of. It reads, "Once upon a time, an era of Sengoku in Japan, all over country, was unified by the Shogun." Then we get into the question of who made this game. The title screen credits both Nippon Dexter and Virgin Games. And complicating things here, almost simultaneously as this game was released, Infocom released a graphical adventure based on the book as one of their very last games. As far as I can tell, this Shogun has nothing to do with Infocom's Shogun, and Virgin Games never released any Shogun game. What I believe is the case is that Virgin held the license to produce games based on Shogun outside of the US. Nippon Dexter sub-licensed it from them and made a game for the MSX computer in Japan. Then Hecht licensed that game from Nippon Dexter and ported it themselves to the Famicom. But all of that is conjecture. Not to get too far ahead of myself, but this was an enormously unpopular game in Japan, and so there's very little information about it online. And that brings me to Hecht, or Hector. The name of the company is Hecht, and that's how they're commonly referred to as, but the label they use for their games is Hector. They are the Famicom collector's worst enemy. The company was founded by the developer of Moero Pro Yaku, and they'll become one of the more prolific Famicom developers with 20 games under their belt. They're also known for having tiny print runs, most of their games not being things that most people would want to collect, and being enormously expensive on the aftermarket. At the time of this recording, I have about 110 Famicom games left to complete my collection. Hecht is by far the company that I'm missing the most games from. Okay, with all of that backstory out of the way, let's get to the game. And this game is a, okay, I don't know what genre to describe it as. I've seen a site describe this game as an RPG, but it really isn't. There's no character growth in it. I've also seen it called a strategy game, and that one seems even more off than RPG. Maybe it's a slightly askew adventure game? When you start the game, you may pick out any character in Japan. Japan having a population of 40 people. You could play as one of 3 daimyos, a bunch of samurai, farmers, or even women. For my character, I chose a woman because it's just such a rare thing in Famicom games. Your goal is to take over all of Japan, first by acquiring 20 followers, and then by locating 3 scrolls. Apparently, conquering Japan was much easier than I thought it was. All 40 characters wander around the game map freely. The status bar at the top of the screen shows the current date, your health, money, follower count, inventory, and what action you're taking. Pressing the A button will let you change that icon. When you select Take, it remains active as you walk around the screen, and whatever you walk over is added to your inventory. Food increases your health, while other items take up one of your slots. There are 3 different types of weapons, 3 different armor pieces, a prayer scroll, and a pass. You can only carry 6 items though, so you might find yourself having to select Drop, and choosing to put one of those down. Selecting the heart will let you talk to anyone on the screen. It's also useful for finding out who they are. Each character has a unique sprite and color combination, but good luck remembering 40 of them. For almost all of the characters, you have to beat them in combat to recruit them. And almost all of them require that you give them something before they're willing to fight you. It could be money or a particular weapon. You really have to play the game with a guide open so that you know what you're doing. Once you've turned over the appropriate item, you get to fight. And all that happens is your 2 characters slam into each other over and over again. If you have 3 pieces of armor, you're effectively indestructible. So that's my recommendation. Collect the armor, hold on to those 3, and then use the other slots to turn things over to other characters. Once you've recruited somebody, you can give them orders. They can go out to collect things for you, or they could act as bodyguards for other characters. The reason a character might need a bodyguard is that your followers will get attacked from time to time and get taken from you. The other commands are a map that lets you see where everyone is in Japan, and the option to save your game to the battery save. I found Shogun to be a really irritating game to play. You run around the map just trying to gather up resources, beat up people for no good reason to recruit them, and hopefully you're recruiting people faster than they're getting stolen away from you. It's not fun. And then there's things like some of the items appearing in spots you can't get to, or how slow it is to get around, and how much empty space there is in the game. Shogun is a game that wants to waste your time. Having 40 characters sounds like a lot, but there really isn't that much difference between them. The big question Shogun leaves me with is, why would anybody make this? The whole thing doesn't make any sense. Namco has finally dropped the family line with Namco Classic. So far they had been naming all of their sports games Family something. Family Tennis, Family Boxing, Family Stadium. But this is not Family Golf. However, people have noticed that the woman on the cover of Namco Classic and Family Tennis seem to be the same person. So it probably was intended to be part of that same line. This is the Famicom's 5th golf game. And given the missteps we've seen, I didn't really have high hopes for it. That said, this is by far the best golf game we've seen on the Famicom. It's a genuinely good golf game. I'm actually kind of impressed by it. On startup you have 2 different modes, practice or tournament. Practice is just playing the default 18 holes, and you do that anyways with the first round of the tournament, so we're going to start there. You can choose to make your own golfer and set up your own bag, or you can pick from a golfer who's modeled on a real-world player. It's a similar approach to what Namco's been doing with their other sports games. For my outing, I chose to play as Jumbo Ozaki's stand-in, since we've seen him turn up a few times. Well, that was my intention. As I'm recording this, I double-checked my notes, and it turns out I was playing as Isao Aoki's stand-in. The tournament has prize money depending on how well you place, and the game has a password to keep track of that. If you place in first or second, then you go on to more difficult tournaments. And in those later tournaments, they just swap out some of the holes. There's only 24 different holes in the game, so it's not even 2 full courses. Now let's play some golf, and the first thing you're going to notice is that all the holes are laid out horizontally on the screen rather than vertically. It gives Namco Classic a bit more resolution to work with. On this screen you can see the layout of the hole, the elevation change over the length of it, and the wind. This is also where you select your club. Press A and you go to a view behind your golfer. Here you can see the lie of the ball and adjust where you're going to strike it. That'll add spin that makes the ball go left or right during flight. Press A one more time and you're into the swing. And rather than watching an animated golfer or a line, you have 3/4 of a circle that represents your swing. If your backswing goes past the end of that, it just resets. So you hit A for your power, and then you hit A again when it gets to the bottom for your precision. Similar to other golf games, but what Namco Classic does is that the more power you put into the swing, the faster it comes back for precision. So if you only go 2/3 of the way up on the power meter, it comes back pretty slowly. It becomes a pretty good strategy to intentionally use a stronger club, and then try to use less power with it. After you're off the tee, you can press the B to get advice from your caddy. He can show you the current score and the layout around the green, but the most useful thing he does is tell you the distance to the pin. There is no guesswork for this one. Not that it will always save you. I was consistently underestimating the power of my pitching wedge on approach. On the green, I also had trouble getting used to the putting power. It looks like you could only use 1/4 of it, but the whole thing is available. Also on the green, the location of the pin is randomized every time you play. So there's some additional variation every time you go through the course. During tournament play, there's always another golfer that you're playing with. I found it to be kind of neat to have a partner around the whole thing. Of course, you're playing against the whole field rather than just them. On the par 3 holes, you're offered $1 million if you get a hole-in-one. And there's a bug on this that if you get the $1 million, it's possible to retry the hole and just keep getting $1 million over and over again. And as for those holes themselves, they are actually pretty difficult. I found people who were saying that shooting 100 over par wasn't uncommon your first time around the course. I was actually pleased I was doing significantly better than that, especially when I started out. Though, after a few bad holes, I started taking some riskier shots just to try them. I ended up 18 over par, which is not bad considering that this is supposed to be a very difficult game. And Namco Classic is something that I would play again and try to improve. The game is an enormous step above anything else we've seen so far on the Famicom in terms of golf. And I'd kinda like to get good enough to be able to play the Namco character-themed holes. Namco is going to make a Namco Classic 2, but that one is very late in the Famicom's life. And I can get that. There isn't a whole lot of reason to improve over this game. I think when I talked about the original Ninja-kun, I mentioned that I liked this game better. I was an idiot. I think I was remembering some previous attempts to play it that had capped out around level 4. And if you just look at the beginning of the game, Ninja-kun Ashura no Sho seems like it's a better game, or at least a pretty distinctive spin on the original. But drilling down into it, I found that this is a bad game through and through. The big warning sign for me was when I was looking up information about the game, and I saw who developed it. I think my exact words were, "Ugh, Micronix." We've been seeing less of them lately as people decide they want to make good games, but I'm afraid Micronix will be with us to the bitter end. Ninja-kun Ashura no Sho was originally an arcade game by UPL. That stands for Universal Playland, which was part of Universal Entertainment, but that's no relation to the movie studio. UPL made the original Ninja-kun, and they were a real third-tier game maker. The arcade game is from late 1987, and it looks like something from 3 years before that. The first Ninja-kun was published on the Famicom by Jaleco, but UPL decided that they needed to get in on that Famicom action themselves. They published exactly one Famicom game. The story of Ninja-kun Ashura no Sho is that there is no story. The manual doesn't have a section on it. The very few sites that mention the game that I've found don't say anything about that. I know that the final boss is Ashura, but I have no idea what their prize is. When you start the game, you have to choose from 3 Hanafuda cards. Which one you select determines your first 2 stages. You could have a side-scrolling action level where you have to get to the end, a single-screen action stage where you have to defeat all the enemies, or a duplicate of the original Ninja-kun, in which case you have to defeat all the enemies. Generally speaking, your goal is to get to the end. You'll be heading either for this square that has steps in it, or a hole that's in the background. These first 2 stages are the major exception to that. Similar to the original Ninja-kun, contact with most enemies on the platforming stages doesn't hurt you. They can stun you for a moment if they run into you, or you can stun them for a moment, but what actually kills you are the projectiles, and it only takes 1 hit to kill you. At least you can shoot the projectiles out of the sky. When you defeat an enemy, if you can hit them again as they drop off the screen, you get 1,000 points. If they do drop off the screen, then they leave behind a scroll. The scroll is worth 100 points at the end of the stage. And just at random, sometimes when you get a scroll it'll reveal this face, which takes away all of your scrolls. And that means that the item that was already worth 1/10 as many points is even more worthless. You might find these crystal power-ups. They'll give you an attack that will clear out a huge area. You can only use it for a few seconds, though. And the first time you pick it up, it pulls in those flames very slowly, while it disables your ability to attack. So you'll be vulnerable when you pick it up. There's a time limit on all of the stages, and when the timer gets down to 30, a fire wheel will appear at the edges of the screen and chase after you. Dying will give you a little bit of time back, but not very much. So if you're on a long stage, and the clock has run down, and then you die, you might as well throw the rest of your lives away. If you can beat the first 2 stages, then you go into this pit, and that's where you have to demonstrate mastery of Ninja-kun's biggest new mechanic: wall jumping and wall climbing. I have not successfully wall jumped. From what I've been reading, it's a frame-perfect input to do a wall jump. You have to push away and hit jump again the very instant that you connect with the wall. If you push toward the wall, then you'll stick to it, and you can climb it by mashing the A button repeatedly. If you stop mashing for an instant, then you fall. If you're crazy enough to play this one, I strongly recommend using an auto-fire controller. If you can't manage to pull off the climb, you can always walk into the shrine gate, and you can choose to just give up and go on to the next stage. If you do complete this stage, then you get a new weapon. Similar stages occur later in the game, and every time you complete one of these, you get a weapon upgrade. First boomerang, then bomb, then sword. You can switch which weapon you're using by pressing up on the D-pad. Stage 4 requires that you climb all the way to the top of this mountain so that you can drop down through a platform and land next to the cave entrance. There's a lot of precise jumping here, and you'll often get juggled and knocked all the way back down the mountain. It's a very frustrating stage to play, but not as frustrating as the next stage. That's the first underwater level. You can swim a bit faster by pressing A, and swing your sword by pressing B. And when I say swing, I mean vaguely extend it a little bit out in front of you. It's a bad idea to try to fight any of the fish with the sword. The hitboxes are terrible, and the fish either have random movement or are homing in directly on you, so when the sword misses, it's instantly fatal. Really, the only option here is to just avoid everything and swim to the end. Much later on, there's a branching path. You could take the door in the middle, or you could take the door at the bottom. And I didn't get much further than that. There's a lag in the controls for Ninja-kun Ashura no Sho. Jumping and attacks seem to occur maybe about 1/10 of a second after you hit the button. And when it comes to jumping, you don't have any control over your movement. And there's more issues beyond that. When you die, all of the enemy positions are retained. If there is an enemy position on top of your spawn point, well, then you're dead again. It also means on stages where you've been clearing enemies out, you might have to go quite a while before you encounter anything. The only kindness they offer the player is that there are unlimited continues. Though if you think about it, continuing does mean that you have to play the game some more. Ninja-kun Ashura no Sho on the Famicom is a bad port of a game that nobody asked for. This would have been barely acceptable in 1986 when people were desperate to buy any Famicom game. In 1988, it's in the middle of some of the most iconic games on the system. I think there's a pretty good reason UPL only published one Famicom game. As a rough estimate, I'm going to play about 50 Famicom adventure games. How many of those were released on the Nintendo Entertainment System? 4. And in 3 of those cases, they were originally American games that got a Famicom release. So that makes Salad no Kuni no Tomato Hime pretty special. It's the one proper example of this popular genre that people outside of Japan got to experience. And if you were going to pick a game to try that experiment with, this is a pretty good choice. It's not too difficult, doesn't have any weird themes, and there's no real gotcha puzzles. Okay, if I had my choice, I'd rather have Metal Slate or Glory, but that wasn't happening for a variety of reasons. Salad no Kuni no Tomato Hime started as a computer game. It was one of those style of adventure games that had a text parser, but also displayed graphics on the screen. It was completely reworked when it came to the Famicom. The story in both versions is that the Salad Kingdom was ruled by King Onion. He was overthrown by his advisor, Minister Pumpkin, and Princess Tomato was leading the resistance to recover the throne. The princess has been kidnapped, though, and you as a cucumber knight are out to rescue her. The interface in the Famicom version is the now standard select a verb, then select an object to do it to. For some reason it separates look and examine. Hit and fight are also two different commands. And there's also the unusual choice of flatter. Early on in the adventure, you'll meet a friendly persimmon called Kakipachi. He'll become your companion through the entire quest, occasionally losing all of your red herring items as you pass between chapters. This is one of those adventure games where really you just have to try everything. You can't put the game into an unwinnable state, or get a game over, so there's no harm in trying. And a lot of the gatekeeping in the game just amount to things being different on a screen once you've gone and done something else. There are a few puzzles to solve, but it's not hard to push your way through with just trial and error. A few chapters into the game, you'll encounter the worst thing about it: the combat system. It's what I'd call the only real misstep. In fights against enemies, you have to win a game of rock, paper, scissors against them, and then also predict what direction they're going to look in. You select rock, paper, or scissors by pressing a direction on the control pad, and then if you win that, you press what direction they're going to look. Get both right and they lose a hit point. A lot of the enemies have a pretty simple pattern that you can learn, but not all of them, and it becomes kind of frustrating. It's not like you can save right before the combat. You can only get passwords in between chapters, so generally speaking, the first time that you encounter an enemy, you're going to have to try to brute force your way through it. There's also first-person mazes in the game. These are pretty slow and clunky to navigate through, though none of them are especially large if you're mapping them. I've got the NES version of Princess Tomato in the Salad Kingdom, so while I was playing Salad no Kuni no Tomato Hime, I was keeping an eye out for differences. The big one is that there's a lot of smoking in the game. A few of the puzzles are just a little bit different, probably tweaked to be a bit less confusing. But overall, the NES version's a pretty good localization. When it comes to adventure games, there often isn't much for me to say. The mechanics of playing it are so simple that there isn't a lot to get into. Salad no Kuni no Tomato Hime has a pretty charming aesthetic to it, and it's one of the most approachable of the Famicom adventure games. In Japan, it's regarded as one of the best Famicom adventure games. I can't really argue with that. At about the half-hour mark for my recording of Saint Seiya Ogen Densetsu Kentetsuen, I stopped and I went, am I doing something wrong? I must have been. There had to be some mechanic I didn't understand, or perhaps I was missing something in the video I was following along with. You see, I just couldn't beat the first boss. It doesn't take too long to reach them, though you do have to sit through a few cutscenes. So I went off, checked a few sources, and no, I wasn't doing anything wrong. Saint Seiya Ogen Densetsu Kentetsuen was infamous for having highly random battles, ones where getting through it was just a matter of raw luck. And players would have to try 10, 20 times before they completed the battle with enough resources that they could continue the game. So let's just say I didn't get very far and that this is a pretty bad game. Saint Seiya was an enormously popular comic and cartoon series. It's about some orphans who have magic armor called cloth, and they engage in battles for some vague reasons. I've never been able to get into it, but the show is very popular around the world. We've already seen one Famicom game based on Saint Seiya, and that game was Saint Seiya Ogen Densetsu. However, that game was made while the comic and cartoon were in the middle of a story arc, so it didn't have a proper ending. Hence, Kentetsuen, or Complete Edition. It actually picks up before the end of the first game. The story arc now has a conclusion, and that's what this game offers. This is the first Famicom game by Shinsei. They were a video game division of a toy company that was closely aligned with Bandai. Before the end of the Famicom's life, the company is going to be acquired by Bandai, and they'll change their name. And with their own internal development house now, Bandai is going to use them for a lot of their games going forward. The very first thing you do when you start the game is select which of 4 knights you want to control. They each vary in how they move and the range of their attack. I found that Shun was most effective at the action stages. If you hit A on a portrait, that character will speak for a little bit, and if you hit Start, then you'll go into the game. The action portions are side-scrolling, and your only goal is really to get to the far right. The A button jumps, and the B button punches or uses your weapon. Your jump is terrible in this game. There's a lot of variance in how it moves, and you'll need to get a real running start to jump over holes. In fact, it's generally a good idea to jump on top of something, then try to jump over the hole. From the second stage on, when you beat up an enemy, you get some 7 senses points. Those points are used to refill your life and Cosmo, so building it up is absolutely vital. But if you stay in one place and fight for a while, then meteors start dropping out of the sky on top of you. I'd still strongly recommend staying in one place, fighting for a bit, and then moving forward until the meteors stop, then repeating. You're going to need every drop of 7 senses by the end. Make it to the end of one of these stages, and you confront one of the evil knights. To have any chance of beating them at all, you need to follow what happened in the storyline. As combat starts, you'll have the opportunity to spend your 7 senses points to refill the life and Cosmo of your character, and then you get into combat. Here you can choose to attack, call on your allies, talk to your opponent, or get information. The first boss encounter is basically a cutscene. All you can do is talk to them a couple of times. The second confrontation is the actual first boss fight, and this is where we can see how attacking works. You select attack, and then you choose which attack ability you want to use. Some of them are mechanically better than others. And then you make your attack. Your potential damage is determined by your Cosmo, but the enemy bosses can just not take damage from an attack. Whether it goes through or not is totally random, but they seem to dodge the attacks about 1/4 of the time. After you've attacked, the boss starts winding up their attack, and your character will raise their hands at that moment. While their hands are up, and while the boss is winding up their attack, you can hit left or right to try to sidestep it. This only works a small portion of the time, but it can completely negate any damage from the attack. If this first boss does hit you, he does about 50 to 60 points of damage. Your maximum health at this point is 199. You will not survive 4 attacks. I've gone down in as few as 3, and it takes about 6 attacks to beat the boss. If you're defeated in a boss battle, then you select a new character and restart the entire stage. The only approach that I found that worked was switching out characters when I got weak. There's another trick in this fight, though. The first time Seiya gets defeated, he gets a vision of the goddess Athena, who provides several hundred 7 senses points, and that allows you to refill his bar. So as a strategy, switch to Seiya immediately, but when you're sending him in, you can remove all of his Cosmo and health points. That puts those back into the pool, and then when he just dies on the first attack, you have a lot more to work with. So with a lot of luck and a timely character swap, I completed that round, and characters don't get replenished in between stages. If you deplete a lot of resources beating a boss, then your game is effectively unwinnable. Get to the end of the 3rd stage and you find the next boss, and instead of fighting, he teleports you to a special stage. This special stage is notable for being the most difficult stage in the game. It has some bad platforming and random enemies that you can't get rid of. In between levels, you have the opportunity to get the game's password. If you select password, that's it. The game is permanently stuck on the password screen. You'll have to reset the game and then type in that password to continue. Also, there's a bug that the game generates invalid passwords. It doesn't occur until very late in the game, and it involves Seiya having a very high health meter. For some reason, Saint Seiya Ogen Densetsu Kantetsuhen got a remake. There's a version of this game for the Wonder Swan, though for their sake, I hope they made some improvements. If you can't tell, this is truly an awful game. A miserable slog front to back. The worst game mechanics are the ones where it's totally random whether you can succeed or fail. Not having any control makes the game boring. It's so bad in this game that I'm not sure it's actually better than the original Saint Seiya game, and that one was pretty awful. Fortunately, this is the end of the Saint Seiya games. I don't know if I could take another one. Cosmopolice Galavan is a game I've been waiting a long time to talk about. You see, it's one of the games that directly led to me doing this project. Sure, I had been kicking around the idea of doing something like this for years because of all of the games that I could not find information on, but I had been really looking forward to playing Galavan, and when I got my cart, I got stuck almost immediately. There was some nuance of the interface that I was missing. I wasn't able to find a lot of help online, and so I thought I really needed to get started on that big project. And here I am, almost a full year after that, finally able to get into Cosmopolice Galavan. Also, after a pretty rough previous month of Famicom games, this is starting a run of about 3 weeks where I like most of the games I'm going to be playing, and a few of them are even some of my favorites on the system. Cosmopolice Galavan was originally an arcade shoot-'em-up. It wasn't a particularly successful game, and when the Famicom port came along, Nihon Busan took the path that a lot of people were doing with their arcade ports, and reworked it entirely for the home. The Famicom Cosmopolice Galavan is a Metroid clone. It doesn't have the fully explorable map, instead it's cordoned off into 6 large areas, but it's still impossible to not see the Metroid influences here. You'll go through the long horizontal corridors that are linked up by vertical shafts, collect power-ups in certain areas that are required to open doors to the next section. You can even shoot overhead if you want to. And tell me these elevators aren't Metroid-inspired. The story of the game is very simple. There's an evil organization called Mado that the Cosmopolice have been fighting, and at the start of the game, all of the Cosmopolice except you have been captured. So you go in as the last member of the Cosmopolice. Each segment of the game follows the same structure. You explore the maze, find the weapons or items that you need to unlock the path, upgrade some equipment so that you can damage the boss, and then beat the gatekeeper to go on to the next section. Both you and your weapons can level up in Cosmopolice Galavan. When you level up, your maximum hit points and Cosmo points increase, though they don't refill. When your weapon levels up, then its damage increases. You start the game wearing your uniform and swinging a lightsaber, and that's all of your equipment. When you kill an enemy with your beam sword, it might drop one of these capsules. There's 3 different types of capsules. One that gives you health, one that gives you Cosmo, and this P that increases your GP. I'm not sure what the G stands for there, so we'll call it Galavan points. You have to hit these capsules with your sword to collect them. Just running over them won't do it. And if you can max out that GP bar, then you transform into your Cosmopolice armor. While the armor's on, you take less damage, and every time you're hit, the GP decreases by 1. If you're not wearing your armor, it's a good idea to find some easy enemies to defeat and build that bar up to the maximum. As you explore, you'll find captured Cosmopolicemen. Interacting with them is a little bit odd. You have to crouch down a short distance away from them. The position is kind of finicky too. Some of these policemen have hints, but others might have items or special weapons. You hit select to switch between what you're using. That rotates between sword, weapon, and item. You can choose exactly what is equipped in each slot by pressing start to bring up this menu. It's also where you can see your sword's level. The weapons and items show you how many Cosmo points it costs to use them. This beam that you get from one of the very first Cosmo policemen can also open some doors. You have to shoot them 3 times to get them to open. Later on, you'll find these portal rooms. You have to stand in front of them and press A and B on the controller, and that will teleport you to an alternate universe, which is just a gloopier area set aside from the main area. To get through the first area of the game, you have to start out by going to get the beam weapon. Once you have that, you can open the doors to get to the far side of the zone. At the opposite end is the first boss, this computer that will sit there and just shoot at you every once in a while. It's not too hard to beat it down with your sword. Defeating the computer opens up some more doors, and you go through this section with some tougher enemies. The worms in particular are nasty because they take a lot of hits to destroy, and they aim their fireball shots at you. So the best way to deal with them is to get in a couple hits, back off to dodge the fireball, and then repeat. Make it through that section and you'll get a crystal that will open up another path, and that blows open this elevator shaft that gets you down to the portal room. In the alternate dimension, you meet this fairy who will offer to sell you something for 50 Cosmo points. She's lying though and will just steal your money. What you really need to do is turn her down, and then she's another boss. Not too difficult to defeat when you remember that you can attack straight up. She gives you the sword that can hurt the final boss of the area. You'll have to go through this mid-boss to get to him, and then you encounter this bouncing demon. You have to hit him in his head, and the jump and attack is not very precise. Still, his attack pattern isn't too difficult to dodge. And once he is defeated, you go further into the complex. I enjoyed Cosmo Police Galavan quite a bit, but it's not a perfect game. You're going to want to grind a few levels, for example. In particular, you're not going to want to fight that first area boss unless you level up your sword a bit. And there will be times where you're just going to have to stop and gather some of those GPs. The grind for your own levels didn't seem as bad, but that might have been because I had to grind for sword power anyways. All that grinding slows the game down when it's really unnecessary. There is a sequel to Cosmo Police Galavan. Cosmo Police Galavan 2 is on the Super Famicom, though that's more of a standard beat-em-up. In Japan, Cosmo Police Galavan isn't well known, but it is regarded as a hidden gem by some people. And I think that hits my opinion. It's got its flaws, but it's a neat game if you can work your way past them. This is one I really wish I could dedicate more time to, and I'll probably return to it in the future. Sometimes there's just a clear dividing line. Let's take a quick walk down Sunsoft's previous releases. Super Arabian, Route 16 Turbo, Iki, Atlantis no Nazo, Tokaido Goju Sansugi, Wing of Medulla, Fantasy Zone, we're getting a little bit better, Midokomen, Shanghai, Ripple Island, actually good, and then Meta Fight. How could this have come out of a company whose output to this point literally defined kusoge, the Japanese term for crappy game? Sunsoft will make some missteps after this, but the majority of the games that they produce from this point on are all-time classics. The full title of the game is Chou-Wakusei Senki Meta Fight. It's one of those confusing Japanese titles that doesn't actually mean a whole lot. You could translate it as Record of the Incredibly Beguiling Stars Meta Fight. I'm not really sure that conveys any information though. The story in the video game is that the third planet in the Sophia star system has been invaded. Scientists on the space station Nora invent a weapon to counteract the invaders, the tank Metal Attacker. They select 15-year-old Kane Gardner to pilot it. If you're wondering who the woman on the box and label is, so were Japanese players. Other information revealed that she was Jennifer Cornett, the 17-year-old inventor of the metal attacker. Metafight consists of 8 interconnected areas that you drive your tank through, and generally speaking, your goal is to locate and defeat a boss. That'll get you another upgrade for the tank, and that upgrade will let you get to a new area. The areas are sprawling platforming mazes. The later areas of the game consist of many interconnected rooms that you have to navigate, and you are allowed to double back to areas that you've already visited. The metal attacker can jump when you press the A button, shoots when you press B, and it can also fire upward when you hold up. You can also collect power-ups that will give you a secondary weapon. Hit select to bring up this screen that shows you what you have. The 3 options at the bottom are the different weapons. You're mainly going to want to use these alternate weapons for enemies that are difficult to hit, like these worms. You fire the special weapon by holding down and pressing B. The homing missiles aren't a bad choice, though the ammo tends to be limited and you fire 1 missile for every enemy on the screen. The lightning is a little bit more common, but it's also effectively useless. There's a random element in where it hits, so if you try to take out enemies as you're jumping over them, you'll often find yourself getting hit by the enemies instead. The triple missile isn't bad. A nice fire and forget option, though it does use 3 ammo every time you shoot it. Sometimes as you're exploring, you'll find these doors that are just too small to get Metal Fighter through. When you encounter those, hit select to have Kane pop out and walk around. Kane is pretty useless on the side-scrolling segments, and he'll die if he falls too far. What Kane can do is go into those doors, and you do that by pressing down. Inside it switches to an overhead view. Here the B button shoots Kane's main gun, and the A button throws out some grenades. Some of the terrain is destroyable, and you'll generally want to shoot all of it because it can hide power-ups. Kane and Metal Attacker each have their own health bar. It's the POW meter, and getting P's will refill that. H's give the Metal Attacker some additional hover ability, something that you'll have to defeat a boss to use. Then there's the 3 things you collect for secondary weapons. You'll often find those in the overhead mazes. So even though the mazes don't always have a boss in them, you still might want to go in to get some power-ups. And then there's the gun icon. This builds up the gun meter for Kane. And each level of gun changes his primary weapon. The first few levels of it just extend the range of his basic attack. Then the next few add curved shots that shoot out. These are generally pretty annoying to have. The final levels make your shots go an enormous wave in front of you. Though as a consequence of this, sometimes you can't hit what's directly in front of you. When Kane gets hurt, he loses 1 point of POW and 1 point of gun. Gun points are a lot rarer than power, and that makes getting damaged as Kane really annoying. The bosses in Metafight are all fought in the overhead view, and they tend to be pretty mean. They move fast and have some really tough to dodge attacks. Fortunately, you can cheat. On stages 2, 4, 6, and 7, there's a bug with the boss. If you throw a grenade and then pause the game right as the boss takes damage, the grenade continues to explode and the boss keeps getting hurt. That can work against you though. If you're taking damage when you pause, you can keep getting hurt. Defeating the boss gets you a power-up for Metal Fighter. The first one is just a key that lets you into the underground lair. The second one is an upgrade to the main cannon so that it can destroy some blocks. And that's as far as I got because, well, I didn't remember the map very well. I spent a bit of time in Area 2 going around in circles. One of the big complaints about Metafight is that it's a very long game, but there's no password system. You have to beat it in one sitting. On the other hand, they do give you unlimited continues. That was changed in the US version, which I think marks the first time we've seen things altered from the Famicom version in order to combat the US rental market. And speaking of that US version, Metafight wasn't very popular in Japan upon release, though it gained a reputation for being one of the system's hidden gems. What it's really known for in Japan is how different the US version is. The US game is the story of a boy chasing down his mutated frog. And in Japan, the strange differences between versions became so well known that they wound up adopting the Blaster Master name for the franchise there. There are a surprising number of sequels to Metafight, most notably the Blaster Master Zero games, which are really good. As for our one and only Metafight game on the Famicom, it's considered a classic for a reason. It's not flawless. For example, I really don't like going down vertical areas in this since you don't have a great view. And it might be a bit too big and open for its own good. And boy, those bosses sure are tough. But this is one of the peak Famicom games. The music's amazing, the first but far from the last time Sunsoft is going to knock it out of the park with the music. The action flows so well too, and I even think that the Famicom version's better than the NES one. This is what 8-bit gaming is all about. It has been 6 months since Capcom released their previous Famicom game. It seems like in 1988 they were still putting their efforts behind arcade games. We also haven't seen a shoot-'em-up in a long while. The previous one was Salamander, which was 10 months and 100 episodes ago. Sadly, 1943 is not a better game than Salamander. On the other hand, it is the second best shooter on the Famicom so far. 1943 is Capcom's sequel to 1942. 1942 got a pretty bad Famicom port developed by Micronix. It was slow, flickery, and way too easy. Capcom ported 1943 to the Famicom themselves. It throws a ton of simultaneous enemies at you with little flicker or slowdown, and while I can't say the music's my favorite, it's miles better than the continuous shrill beeping that Micronix added to 1942. Some features had to be lost from the arcade, like the simultaneous 2-player mode, but they added some things too, like the ability to customize your plane, and to enter a password to continue from any stage. It's also extremely difficult. The original title of the game was 1943 The Battle of Midway. For the Famicom release, that was changed, although the title was retained in other regions. The new subtitle, which appears only on the box, is The Battle of Valhalla. Now, it could be that they just didn't want to have a game where you're blowing up the Japanese military, but I'd like to think that it's because somebody pointed out that the Battle of Midway took place in 1942. 1943 is broken up into a series of 24 missions. Each of them starts out with you launching from an aircraft carrier, and then taking down waves of planes high in the sky. For most of the stages, once you've gotten far enough, you descend to attack a fleet head-on. And finally there will be a boss with a lot of targets to hit, all of which are firing something at you. You have energy in this game. The E ticks down a point every few seconds, and getting hit by a bullet or running into another plane causes you to lose a huge amount of energy. However, reaching 0 energy doesn't end your game. Once you're out, you still have to get hit one more time to be defeated. You only have 1 life in 1943 though, so even though your plane has health, it's still incredibly difficult. There's one more use for the energy. If you press A, a lightning flash occurs that destroys all of the enemies on the screen, freezes any scrolling if you're down near the ships, and it costs 20 energy. There are ways to recover that energy though. If you see a formation of red planes, you can destroy all of them to make a power-up drop. Often it'll be a POW, and that recovers a small amount of energy. Shooting the POW can make it cycle through weapon pickups, but if you keep shooting and keep cycling, eventually it'll get to a fuel tank that restores a significant amount of energy. You also get energy for completing a stage, of course, and if you can find one of these pinwheels, that'll refill your energy to maximum. Besides shooting down the red planes, you can also hit invisible targets and make these items appear. There's 2 kinds of special weapons that you can get: a 5-way shot and a 3-way shot. The 5-way shot has a pretty limited range and a slow rate of fire, but it can destroy incoming bullets. The three-way shot's a little bit weaker than your regular gun, but it can fire pretty rapidly. The tough enemies that require multiple hits don't have invincibility frames, so you can approach them and hit them with many shots simultaneously from these alternate weapons. After you pick up an alternate weapon, there's a timer that counts down, and when it runs out, the weapon's done. You have one more special attack in your arsenal. Normally you'd want to tap the B button rapidly to fire the main gun, but if you hold down the B button for a few moments, it'll charge up a big laser attack. That attack both does extra damage and penetrates targets. It makes it very useful against the ships where there's a lot of turrets all in a line. When you start the game, you're given the opportunity to power up your plane. You initially have 3 points to distribute among 5 categories: attack, defense, energy, special weapon attack, and special weapon time limit. While you're playing and hunting for power-ups, you can reveal one of these invisible bamboo shoots. Run into it and you get 1 more point to add into one of your stats. And you will need those upgrades. 1943 has a bad tendency to throw planes at you from multiple directions simultaneously, and even worse are these large vehicles that tend to block your shots at other things. You could get really chewed up having one of those in the way of incoming planes. And it's not too long into the game before they start sending you 3 or 4 of these at once. When you get down to the surface attack, you have to take out as many targets on the ships as you can. If you don't take out enough, it'll send you back to the beginning of the raid. When you do get a game over, you'll get your password in the lower right-hand corner. And the game also gives you unlimited continues to try to beat it. I have 2 significant problems with 1943. The first is that it's a bit dull to look at. There's a lot of flying over open water in this one. The other thing is that the game has a tendency to repeat itself. A lot of the bosses and surface attacks are very similar to each other. Since there's 24 missions, it does make the game feel a bit padded. 1943 is a good, albeit extremely challenging shooter. The fact that they give you a password, though, means that it never really winds up being frustrating. In fact, I'd say it's the best shoot-'em-up that Capcom released on the system. Okay, they only released 2 shoot-'em-ups, but still, it's pretty good. Fire Rock is the first disk system release by Use Corporation. If you're not familiar with Use, well, there's a good reason for that. They didn't publish very many games, and most of them are notoriously bad. But the developer of Fire Rock is System Sacom, a company that we've already seen on the disk system because they were part of Square's Disk Original group. In fact, they still have one more release to go under that label. I'll get to that in a couple of days. Sacom was primarily a computer game developer, and they used the disk system as a way to dip their toe into the console market. As soon as you start up Fire Rock, you're confronted by this screen. And you might be asking yourself, who is Mark Flint? Well, Mark Flint was one of their in-house programmers. And although the name might make you think that he came from overseas, he is Japanese. Sacom was trying to turn him into their star programmer. They even released a collection of games that he ported under the title All About Mark Flint. From what I can tell, these efforts never really paid off. Flint never became the celebrity programmer, game designer, or whatever they were trying for. And in fact, it's left people kind of bewildered why System Sacom was pushing him so hard. Is Mark Flint a pseudonym? A name that Sacom came up with to promote their games as somewhat exotic? Nobody seems to know. Fire Rock became the only console game promoted with Mark Flint's name. The plot involves a meteor striking the Earth, and then volcanic eruptions occurring everywhere. And as a nameless hero, you have to descend into those volcanoes and destroy the aliens before they destroy the world. And to do that, you have to get through 6 stages, which consist of vertically scrolling shafts linked by doors, and you have to collect 4 symbols on every stage, defeat 4 bosses, and then reach the exit door. In this game, B attacks and A jumps, and here's where I have to talk about the movement. Moving around in Fire Rock is nightmarish. You have enormous momentum, and you bounce around everywhere. You can't jump when you're in the air, and you'll be in the air accidentally if you ever do something like hit a small bump, or hit the attack button, because every time you attack you do a little hop. Every surface in Fire Rock might as well be ice. Moving with any kind of precision is nearly impossible, and the stage design requires a great deal of precision. I couldn't make it past the second stage just due to how tough it was to control. Coming into contact with anything will send you flying, and the game often bottlenecks you so that you have to go through an area packed with attacks, or it funnels you into lava pits that will launch you into other damage sources. It makes Fire Rock completely frustrating to play. Now there is one interesting thing about the movement in Fire Rock. You can cling to walls and ascend them by mashing the A button. You can't jump off of walls, you just release and start to fall. So really this is used to reach ledges that are directly above you. But even this wall climbing doesn't feel great. You're just shoving your face into a wall, mashing the A button and hoping that you'll eventually move up. All of the movement in Fire Rock just makes the game feel awful to play. Naturally, there are power-ups to collect on every stage. The blue pots restore 1 point of health. You start out with 5 and there's a maximum of 99. You can see your current health by pressing the start button, and it's the number on the left. Collecting the heart gives you a shield that will take damage before your health, though it goes away if you ever touch lava. You can also collect multiple hearts, and the strength of that shield is the number on the right when you pause the game. Meat is probably the most important item for you to collect. Getting it will increase your jump height, and you're going to have to collect almost all of the meat on a stage in order to collect all of the items. It's not enough to jump up and touch an item to collect it. You have to jump high enough that the item is below your waist in order to collect it. After you finish a stage, your jump power is reset to the base level, so collecting meat is one of your major priorities. The torches increase your firepower, and your attacks are one of the few bright spots in this game. You can attack diagonally and up, and your shots have a little arc to them. As you get more torches, you get the ability to throw more torches. And if you collect 8 torches, then you get the Fire Rock, and that makes your attacks a lot more powerful. I did notice that sometimes my ability to attack just paused suddenly. It wasn't due to there being too many attacks on screen, I just mysteriously lost the ability to shoot for a couple of seconds. There is a continuous stream of enemies that spawn in as you explore, but these are taken out in one hit. The real danger are the bosses. And all of the bosses, even the ones that are a giant swarm of regular enemies, are only vulnerable at one point. So you'll have to spend a lot of time shooting and trying to figure out where you can hit them. There's a rather rapid progression in how much health each boss has, so you only need to hit the first boss about 5 times, but by the end of stage 2 you have to hit a boss 20 times, and it goes up from there. Since the only real strategy in the boss fights is to find the safe space where you can hit the boss's vulnerable point from, adding more health just makes them more boring. There's 4 more items that you can collect, and these are the ones that are used to escape the stage. These items have names: Vicious, Regia, Zarak, Aegis. Those names only appear in the manual though and don't really matter. This is just one of those games where they try to give it a lot of lore. If you're having trouble with the game, there is a cheat code that will make you invincible. Hold down the A and B buttons, then turn the system on. Keep holding down A and B as you flip the disc, get to the title screen, and then wait for the title screen to cycle 15 times. On the 15th time, the text will turn white, and that's when you start the game. And after that, you're invulnerable, though you'll still bounce around when you run into things. Obviously, I didn't have a lot of fun with Fire Rock, and so I was really surprised when I found that it's considered to be a bit of a hidden gem in Japan. The big point seemed to be that people really liked climbing walls and the music. But as I mentioned, I hated playing this. The control scheme is just too much of a mess, and the boss fights that are central to the game all become situations where you're just looking for the right spot to stand, and then pound the damage sponge until it falls over. Fire Rock is an incredibly frustrating game to play, and if you make it over that hurdle, there isn't a reward waiting for you on the other side. So, I had a small problem while I was recording Risa no Yosei Densetsu. The game is divided up into chapters, and at the end of chapter 1, you have to talk into the Famicom's microphone. This is a feature on the Player 2 controller of the original Famicom, which had hardwired controllers. I record on an AV Famicom. It has controller ports like the Nintendo Entertainment System, so that was a problem. Fortunately, I had plenty of footage here, but if you want to play Risa no Yosei Densetsu, you'll need to keep in mind that you have to have the microphone. Something that you're going to notice very quickly about Risa no Yosei Densetsu is that Konami is directly copying Nintendo. They're not even being subtle about it. The fairy tale setting feels like it might be a bit inspired by Shin Onigashima, but the real swipe is from Nakayama Miho no Tokimeki High School. Like that game, Konami got a real-life star to be part of their game. Risa Tachibana was the hot new thing at the time. She debuted as a singer barely 1 year before this game was released, and this is one of those cases where a talent agency basically manufactured an entire phenomenon around her. She even has a Nakayama Miho tie because her first acting job was in a sequel television show to the program that was heavily used to promote Miho. Basically, Risa was the next Miho, and since Miho had a game, Risa had to have one too. Coinciding with the release of the game was a single also titled Risa no Yosei Densetsu, Fairy Tale. Naturally, that song is peppered with references and hints to the game. The biggest thing here that signals that Konami was just copying Nintendo are the phone numbers. At multiple points in the game, someone will give you a phone number, and then you, the player, were supposed to call that phone number to get a special message from Risa herself. However, these phone lines were not up very long. You had until August 8th to get those messages. So, don't call that number right now. As far as I can tell, this game was never reissued either, so all versions of the game have those phone numbers in them. There's one more weird way that this game is copying Tokimeki High School, and it's kind of invisible here. This game was released on a blue disc. The blue discs had been Nintendo's exclusive special packaging for games that had been part of a contest. Risa no Yosei Densetsu is the only non-Nintendo game to use a blue floppy disk. The plot of the game is that you're hanging out at a Risa concert when both you and Risa are drawn into another world. A fairy, who also looks exactly like Risa, shows up and says that the two of you have to defeat an evil witch. To do that, you have to collect 3 special items, a harp, a jewel, and a sword, use those to defeat the witch, and then Risa and you can return to the real world. The game is packed with references to various fairy tales and classic children's stories, though most of them appear after the first chapter. But this is the little match girl. Yeah, they really like Hans Christian Andersen in this game. This is one of those menu-driven adventure games where you pick a verb and then pick something that you're going to do that verb to. Not all of the verbs are there continuously. There will be a few that only show up at certain locations, which will also tell you that you have to use that verb there at some point. The verbs are nothing too surprising. Look, talk, take, use. If you want to save your progress, you need to hit the start button, and then you can record how you're doing. Risa no Yosei Densetsu has puzzles, though I wouldn't say they're especially good ones. Your options are so limited that you'll solve them by trying everything. However, the game does have a pretty heavy dose of repeat command syndrome, a disease that infects a lot of these early console adventure games, where you have to use the same command over and over again, even though it appears to not be doing anything, until suddenly it allows you to progress. It's a technique to pad the game length that doesn't play fair with you. It's not a challenge to overcome or something you have to figure out, you just mash all of the menu options until it goes forward. There's also things that you have to know about Risa herself in order to progress. These details are in the manual, but if you're just playing it, you're probably going to struggle with them. One of the nice things in Risa no Yosei Densetsu is that they did include a lot of locations in the game. I'm used to these adventure games minimizing how many locations there are in order to save graphical memory, but even in Chapter 1 there's over a dozen different screens. Okay, some of them all look kinda similar, but it's still giving you more places to explore. In Japan, Risa no Yosei Densetsu is really well regarded. I mean, it lets players have an adventure with their favorite pop star. Of course they're gonna like it. And at the very least, Risa no Yosei Densetsu has a good atmosphere. There's some creative style here, and by the standard of console adventure games at the time, this does stand out. This is an approachable fantasy adventure game that works pretty well, and you probably won't get stuck for very long, assuming you know Risa Tachibana and have a microphone. We've got a big milestone here. I am now 1/3 of the way through Famidaily. Just 694 episodes more to go. And the game for this 33% milestone is Yokai Dochuki, one of the quirkiest games we're going to find. But before I get into that, my cartridge is a good opportunity to talk a bit about how Namco packaged their games. For one thing, after 4 years, Namco has changed their trade dress. The cartridge labels Namco had before were photographs of the game being played, with the logo and a drawing of the main character layered on top of it. That switched with Namco Classic when they switched to a completely drawn label. And then there's the stickers. Namco's cartridges came with no label on top of the game. Most Famicom carts don't have labels on top of them, but in Namco's case, they had a place for a label on top. In the box, you'd get a sheet of labels with 3 different options of what you could put on top. One with some character graphics and the logo, one with the title of the game in plain text, and one with a blank for you to write whatever you wanted on. Namco would eventually start including other stickers with their games too. Because of this, you'll find Namco carts with a few different labels on top. The ones using the blank label seem to be the rarest. You'll also find that the kids in the 1980s had a bad tendency to peel off those stickers and slap them anywhere on the cartridge. And that's why my copy of Yokai Dochuki has that strange label at the top. Yokai Dochuki was an arcade game. It seems to have been kind of popular in Japan, or at least well remembered. So naturally Namco had to bring it to a home console, the PC Engine. It was the first third-party release on the PC Engine, and as such, it signaled Namco pushing away from Nintendo. For the next few years, the PC Engine is where Namco is going to be putting their primary efforts, and the Famicom will be getting its ports months later. The story is that Terunosuke was a very naughty little boy. So while asleep, he's sent to hell. Now he has to make his way through the entire afterlife to receive judgment. Fortunately for him, when he got sent to hell, he also gained the ability to fire spiritual blasts. The best way I could describe Yokai Dochuki is an action platformer, but it does become a lot more complicated than that. The game is divided up into 5 regions, and for the first 4, your goal is simply to get to the next one. On the first 2 stages, just keep going to the right and you'll eventually get there. On stages 3 and 4, you have to complete a special task before you're allowed to complete the stage. And stage 5 requires that you behave in certain ways, and how well you do determines which of 6 endings you get. The B button fires your spiritual blasts, and these stun enemies for a short time. That's pretty useful against the tougher enemies, where you can stun lock them until you defeat them. I did find it pretty difficult to hit bouncing enemies with the shot, though. I wound up having to jump into the air and firing to try to catch them. If you feel the need for more firepower, you can press down to charge up your attack. Don't overcharge it though, or you'll be stunned for several seconds. It takes so long to charge that attack that I found it to be pretty useless. It's much easier to just stun enemies forever with the regular shot. When an enemy is defeated, they drop some money. And you're going to need a fair amount of that cash. Starting on the second stage, you'll find shops from time to time. You could buy health refills, attack power-ups, or permanent upgrades. The permanent upgrades are actually fairly cheap, so I'd recommend buying those quickly. You can get flippers that'll help you swim, and a potion that doubles your walking speed. The attack power-ups are more expensive, and they double your shot rate. It's useful, but not absolutely required, and so I'd skip the first upgrade and just buy the second. Another place you could spend your money are the temples. You'll find them on stages 2, 3, and 4, and they also can get you a permanent upgrade. When you reach one, you're offered to increase your piety, attack, or jump. You're not limited to choosing just one, you could get all 3 of them. The catch is, after you select what you want to upgrade, you then have to donate to the temple. How much you donate determines your time limit on the upgrade minigame. I've done it in as short of time as 5,000 gold donation, but there's a bit of a random element, and for that reason I'd recommend donating 10,000. Once you have that, you need to mash the A and B buttons as fast as you can to get that bar built up. Reach the top and you get your upgrade. Then you can try the remaining ones. Piety adds 3,000 to your pious score, and that has a huge impact on what ending you get. There's other specialty rooms you could visit. There are hotels where you could spend the night to recover health. This bathing woman will give you a heart that will refill your life if you run out. And you can play a guessing game against this woman. One major trick to Yokai Dochuki is that there are a lot of hidden paths. And some not-so-hidden paths. As a general rule, try jumping off the top of the screen to see if there's something there. And you can also find things down in some pits. Though in later stages it's usually just monsters you have to fight to get back out again. Some of those monsters can be pretty nasty too. Like this guy who will jump on your back and ride you around while he steals your gold. Or these hands that pop out of the ground to throw fireballs. The hands aren't even nice enough to drop treasure once they're defeated. If you find yourself face to face with a boss, you can't fight them yourself. You need to hit select to summon your ectoplasmic friend, who will fly around and blast the enemies. That only works if you have a talisman though. You start with one, and for the rest you have to buy them in stores. So always make sure that you have at least one on you. Stage 3 has 2 paths, one of which has you fight the boss, the other leads you to this turtle being tormented. You can pay 30,000 gold to have the guys leave, and then the turtle takes you to the underwater palace. There you'll enjoy a burlesque show, and depart with a nice box. If that story sounds familiar to you, then you'll have a pretty good idea of what you're supposed to do with that box. The 4th stage's exit is blocked until you recover 3 talismans. They're guarded by mini-bosses that you'll have to explore to locate. When you die in Yokai Dochuki, you have unlimited continues, but you lose 3,000 piety each time you use one. So if you continue, you're essentially locked out of the best ending. And that's the game. It's not super difficult, but there's a ton of hidden stuff to find, and getting that best ending is a real challenge. The biggest problem with Yokai Dochuki is why would I play the Famicom version when I've got the PC Engine version? The Famicom expands the levels a little bit, but it's a major step down graphically, and I also feel that the controls are just a little bit better on the PC Engine. Still, if you only had a Famicom, this is a perfectly fine version. Sanada Juu Yuushi is another game about a Sengoku-era general, commanding large armies in battles and attempting to stop Ieyasu Tokugawa before he becomes the shogun. And it's not a strategy game. At least, not really. I've seen some sites classify it as an RPG, but there's no character progression or growth, so that genre doesn't really fit. I think I would call it an adventure game. An adventure game that uses an RPG-style interface and has a combat system that's a very simple strategy game. Sanada Yukimura was a Sengoku period samurai, and in popular legend, he was the greatest samurai of the Sengoku era. He led the forces opposing Ieyasu Tokugawa in the final great battle of the Sengoku period. In the novels and stories that followed that period, he was assisted by a group of 10 ninja called Sanada Juu Yuushi, or the 10 Braves of Sanada if you like. That's what this game is based on, and the Sanada Juu Yuushi also tend to pop up a lot in popular culture. The story in this game is that Yukimura has to go around and recruit all 10 of the ninja. Once you've recruited everyone, then you can go confront Ieyasu. Since the game revolves around recruitment, that makes it more of an adventure game in my eyes, even though you have these Dragon Quest-style overhead views. So to recruit the first ninja, you have to go over here to this hut, that's where he lives, but he's not available yet because he's waiting for his master to return. So you go down here and you find out that his master's dead, and then go back and he'll join up with you. As you're walking around, you'll have random encounters with enemies, and the combat system here is really confusing. First, those aren't hit points. That's how many men are on each side. You're attacked by one type of enemy at a time, and there's 10 different types of enemies in the game. You have 3 options in combat: fight, run, or recruit. When you choose fight, you have to choose which character is going to attack. Each character is strong against some types of enemies and weak against others. So you'll have to feel out who's good against what, or read a guide like I did. Because that number is the size of your unit, you can't just rest to recover. That's where recruiting comes in. In every combat, you can try to bring the people that you're fighting over to your side. Again, every character has different types of units that they're good at recruiting, and not necessarily the ones that they're strong against. To recruit people, you'll have to choose how many of them you're going to recruit, and then they'll tell you how much food you have to offer them. If you accept the deal, then you also have to have weapons to outfit them for your unit. And of course, every character has a different type of weapon that they require. You can buy all of these resources in town and carry them around with you for recruiting out in the field. One of the stranger options in the game is after you recruit a ninja, you can get rid of them. Selecting this option from the menu will let you send a ninja off to gather resources. They'll be gone and unavailable to use in combat until they return. Naturally, all of them have specialties that determine what they could find. There's only one more stat you need to be aware of, and that's the loyalty of your troops. Unit loyalty drops a little bit every time you attack, and it drops quite a bit when you recruit new people into it. Remember, those guys were fighting you only a few minutes ago. You build up loyalty by choosing this option, and then paying your troops. It is possible for loyalty to fall so low that your troops rebel against you. Then you have to engage in combat against them, and that character will have 0 men for the battle. The other menu options are just to talk, to give you an overview of everyone in your party, and to show your inventory. One strange thing about the game, the thief units are not Sengoku-era bad guys. They're the mobsters from Kemco's Superman game, and the music that plays during the fight with them is from Kemco's Spy vs. Spy game. Sanada Juu Yuushi has a battery save, and you would get 3 slots for it. If you're wiped out, you're revived with only 20 troops, so most people choose to save and then reset if something goes wrong. Sanada Juu Yuushi is a different kind of game. I can't really call it an RPG, but it's still pretty grindy since you have to build up your armies by recruiting over and over again. But the strategies in combat are trivial once you have a guide that tells you who to use against what. It also seems to be a very short game. The game seems to scale its difficulty based on how many troops you have, and there's a maximum of 250 per character. So if you take a little bit of time to grind up to the maximum, you can zip through this game in under 10 hours. In Japan, the game Sanada Juu Yuushi seems to be well regarded, although not wildly popular. I think you could make a pretty good argument that it's Kemco's best game, too. It's quirky and not quite effective, but it's also distinctive and very playable. So that automatically puts it ahead of most of Kemco's other games. I almost had a real problem with this one. I had to double check my cart. The reason is Taito released 2 games with almost the exact same name, using almost the exact same cartridge label. And as it turned out, I had the wrong one in that spot in my collection. Oddly enough, this 2 games with almost the same name and virtually identical labels is going to happen again in the next 5 days. Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium is Taito's entry into the yearly Famicom baseball game series contest. If you're keeping count, this is now the 3rd franchise that will give us yearly baseball game releases. And we're not yet done with those either. Just like with the other baseball games we've seen, Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium uses real teams from the Japanese baseball leagues, along with their actual players. Your goal in the game isn't to play a full season, it's to beat every single other team in the league. Even though it's yet another baseball game, Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium does bring a few new things to the table. The most notable change is that you no longer have to run the fielding yourself. When you select your team, you're given the choice to manually or automatically do fielding. So you no longer have to guess where the ball is going to go. You could just let the computer players get underneath it. In automatic mode, the players will move to intercept the ball on their own, but you can take over at any point to throw the ball where you'd like. In my first game I tried using the manual fielding, and it seemed to be extra bad in this one. So definitely use that automatic option. Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium also has commentators for the game, though they really only show up at the beginning and the end, and at the end you get an instant replay of the best play of the game. I found the pitching in this game to be a particular challenge. It doesn't work anything like pitching in other Famicom baseball games. When you're playing single player, you go to a view behind the pitcher, and I suspect that might be why the controls get inverted. You see, you press down for fastballs and up for sliders, and you have an enormous amount of control over the ball in flight. You can make it speed up or slow down right when it reaches the plate, which is what you have to do in order to get strikes. Or you can make the ball have some pretty wild curves. Your pitcher can also injure themselves. If that happens, you'll have to replace them immediately, and they'll probably be unavailable for the next game. Also, it's possible to trigger a bench-clearing brawl with the pitcher, though I didn't manage to do that. The field seems to be a bit compressed in Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium. It makes it so that balls that look like they're out of bounds will be called as fair, and it makes stealing bases much more effective than it is in other games. After the game is won or lost, you get points to allocate to your team members. Everybody can have their power, accuracy, and fielding upgraded. Building up stat points on your pitchers can even give them magic pitches. After you've entered your stats, you can save your game or get a password. Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium has a battery save, but it also gives you these enormous passwords so that you could take your team over to a friend's house and play against a team that they've built up. One more interesting feature of the game, it has a female softball team in it. Team I is all women. When you feel like you're done playing 9 innings for a while, you can also compete in a home run derby. Just be careful not to hit the pitcher. I think Kyokyoku Harikiri Stadium is the most full-featured baseball game we've seen on the system so far. It's got a lot of wonderful touches, and it looks great. The thing is, I really hate the pitching in this game. I just don't like how it feels at all. The amount of control you have on that ball in flight feels unnatural, and the controls are the opposite of what you'd expect. You're going to be spending half your time pitching when you play this game, so the pitching being bad is a pretty big problem. But maybe I'm the weirdo in this case. Kyukyoku Harikiri Stadium is well regarded in Japan. Maybe the series improves as it goes along. We are going to see 4 sequels to it on the Famicom.